Good afternoon and welcome to the National Capital Planning Commission's March 7, 2019 public meeting. Noting the presence of a quorum, I would like to call this meeting to order. Before we proceed with the agenda, there is one procedural matter. As you know, Chairman Bryant's term as chairman of the commission expired on January 1, 2019. And as of yet, the president has not appointed a replacement. The bylaws require the commission to elect one of its members to perform the function of chairman at the start of each meeting, with the understanding that the vice chairman is the likely person to be elected to run the meeting. Thus, to officially convene the open session, the commission must nominate and vote on selecting someone who would run the March open session. Can I have a motion for that?
I move that the commission elect Mr. Gallus, the commission's vice chair, to run the March 7th meeting, 2019 commission meeting.
Is there a second? I've heard a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. A motion that I, as vice chairman, would run our meeting today has been moved and seconded and approved, and I thank you, fellow commissioners, for electing me to run this meeting. Okay. Agenda item 2 is a report of the vice chairman. That's me. At last month's meeting, we recognized the past service of Commissioner Rhodes, who served for 9 years on the commission on behalf of the Secretary of Defense. Mr. Rhodes sent a great response to back thanking the commission members and staff, and I'd like to read a short excerpt from his note. The commission is exceptionally blessed to have the tremendous professional staff that supports them, starting with the executive on down. They are exceptionally effective. They are distinctly skilled and knowledgeable in their disciplines. They consistently consider all the sides of an issue as they develop positions. They are creative and accommodating. Truly, they are everything one would want from a planning staff. It was a privilege to experience their work and support. I also must share what a true pleasure it was working with the commission members. That's us. A governing body like this represents various organizations, various perspectives, and brings to the discussions many individual experiences. Yet we do so with the common charge of the commission charter. I was consistently struck by the thoughtful discussions and questions of the commissioners and the respectful professional discourse. It was a professional and a personal pleasure to be afforded the privilege of working with each commissioner. So we really thank former Commissioner Rhodes for his kind and complimentary words. Also would like to welcome back Commissioner White, who's been absent for too long, but we're very glad you're back. Yep. Okay, moving to agenda item 3 is the report of the Executive Director, Mr. Acosta.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to Mr. Rhodes for those very fine, kind comments, and also to welcome back to Commissioner White. I'd like to congratulate our Office of Public Engagement staff for their recently winning 3 different national awards for their work on our revamp agency website. I'll note that this website was done totally in-house and by our staff, and it was implemented by Steve Morgan, Paul Jutton, Stephen Zoological, and led by Julie Costers. So thank you for your great work there. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank the staff for their work on the small cell guidelines analysis that is on today's agenda. Almost every planner in this agency worked on that. They went on a field trip, did field work out in the Monumental Corps. That kind of led to the recommendations in the dead of winter. And I do thank them for their great work on that. So thanks very much to Diane Sullivan, Matt Fliss, Beth Miller, and Karen Sherholt for leading this effort. And that concludes my report, Mr. Chairman. And I have a written report before you in case you have any questions.
Thank you very much. Okay, agenda item 4 is the legislative update. Ms. Schuyler?
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I have nothing to report at this time.
Thank you very much. Agenda item 5 is the consent calendar. There are 10 consent calendar items on this month's agenda. Of these, 7 are Sprint telecommunications facility upgrades to provide smaller antennas submitted by the General Services Administration for preliminary and final approval at the following federal buildings in Washington. So allow me to read this long list. Number 1, the Export-Import Bank, Lafayette Federal Building at 811 Vermont Avenue Northwest. The U.S. Office of Personnel Management, Theodore Roosevelt Building, located at 1900 East Street Northwest. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, Robert C. Weaver Building at 451 7th Street Northwest. The U.S. Department of Energy, James Forstall Building, 1000 Independence Avenue, Southwest. The U.S. Department of Labor, Francis Perkins Building, 200 Constitution Avenue, Northwest. U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Hubert Humphrey Building at 200 Independence Avenue, and the U.S. Department of Commerce, Herbert Hoover Building at 1401 Constitution Avenue. Those are the 7 from GSA, and there are 3 other consent calendar items as well, including number 1, the continuation of Meridian Hill Park Preservation, Phases 5 and 6, submitted by the National Park Service for preliminary site plan approval. Number 2, removal of a portion of 39th Street Northwest from the permanent system of highways, Lot 801, Square 1823, submitted by the D.C. Department of Consumer and Regulatory Affairs. And 3, the renovations and a 6,800 square foot addition to the Washington, D.C. VA Medical Center, Oncology and Cancer Center, submitted by the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs for comments on the concepts plan. Okay. Is there a motion to approve the consent calendar? Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the motion carries. Thank you. Okay, I gotta have a drink after that. Water only. Okay, moving right along to the open session. The first item on the open session is Agenda Item 6A, to approve the preliminary and final site development plans for the National Zoological Park Supplemental Perimeter Fencing. I believe Mr. Gerbich is going to give a presentation.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, members of the Commission. The Smithsonian Institution has submitted revised site development plans for supplemental perimeter fencing at the National Zoological Park in Washington, D.C. As many of you will recall, this project was originally considered by the Commission at its July 2018 meeting, when you voted to postpone action due to outstanding questions from the public regarding the need for enhanced security measures, which included, in particular, the construction of permanent visitor screening pavilions at zoo entrances. The Commission requested that the Smithsonian conduct public outreach on the project and provide a security briefing to the Commission. Per NCPC request, the Smithsonian has since conducted public outreach, including both civic groups and local leaders, and provided additional security information to the Commission. This revised submission reflects modifications that respond to public concerns, which I'll describe in detail during the presentation. The National Zoo is located off of Connecticut Avenue in Northwest Washington, D.C., in a largely residential area of the city. It's generally bounded by Klingel Road to the north, Adams Mill Road to the east, and Calvert Road to the south. North Road, which is shown here towards the center of the site, is an internal park road that provides access to the zoo parking lots. The zoo also sits within Rock Creek Park, which is managed as a unit of the National Park Service. There are 2 components to the supplemental fencing project. The first of which is the consolidation of redundant visitor access points to enhance safety and security, improve wayfinding for visitors, and better protect the animal collection. As can be seen on the existing map to the left, the zoo currently has 13 points of pedestrian entry to the central zoo site, which are shown with blue and orange circles. The blue circles are the 3 primary, more formal zoo entrances, which are at Connecticut Avenue, the bus lot along North Road, and the lower zoo, while the 10 orange circles are secondary, more informal zoo entries, which I'll describe in more detail here in a moment. The map on the right shows the proposed consolidation, which seeks to retain the main entries in blue and reduce the number of informal entries in orange to 3, which would provide direct access from the zoo parking lots. As you can see, the majority of access points to be closed are at the north end of the site and largely provide access from parking lots A and B. These closures would not affect access from adjacent neighborhoods, which primarily enter through the Connecticut Avenue entrance or the Lower Zoo entrance by way of the Harvard Street Bridge, which is identified here with the easternmost purple circle. This slide provides an example of the proposed access changes at Parking Lot B. As can be seen in the highlighted area on the map to the left, there are 5 access points at this parking lot, which would be consolidated to 1. The image on the right shows 2 of the points that would be closed, which provide similar access into the zoo. The number of informal pathways into the zoo, many of which are within a short distance from each other, can be confusing to visitors and pose a challenge to effective wayfinding signage. Staff believes that the consolidation of entries would serve to improve visitor navigation and wayfinding in these areas as well. The only area where visitor entry would be closed without an immediately adjacent access alternative is near the Amazonia exhibit in Research Hill at the bottom of the zoo, which is shown here with a red circle, which the zoo master plan and wayfinding maps at the zoo identify as kind of a staff-only entrance area. The zoo has indicated that this gate is intended to provide staff and service vehicles a route between the visitor areas of the zoo and back-of-house functions at Research Hill, including animal care areas and the veterinary hospital, and that it was never intended as a public entrance. There is an existing pedestrian gate for staff at this location that is generally closed, and visitors that enter here must walk through gaps between planters to enter the zoo. I'll show the details of this condition on another slide later in the presentation. It's important to note that the closure of this gate would not disallow access from the multi-use trail entirely, but would instead push access down to the primary entrance at the lower zoo. The multi-use trail is highlighted on this detail map in pink, which shows the route to the lower zoo entrance at the blue circle. The distance from the Amazonia entrance to the lower zoo entrance is about a half mile further, which is an approximately 3-minute bike ride or a 10-minute walk. Smithsonian staff has indicated that bike racks are provided in front of the nearby zoo police building and that there is a new restroom facility near the adjacent conservation pavilion. I'd like to briefly note that the Commission received several comments expressing concerns that public access to the multi-use trail would change or be closed as a result of the project. While the trail segment is currently closed as part of an unrelated repair project, the trail will reopen when repairs are complete, and this project will not change access. To ensure adequate time for zoo operations and maintenance use, the trail segment is open from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. in the spring and 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. in the summer. During other periods when the segment is closed, trail users can take an alternative narrow route that runs through a tunnel that is shared with Beach Drive. You may recall from the previous submission that the Smithsonian had anticipated a second phase of the project, which would include the construction of permanent security screening pavilions at the main zoo entrances. The proposed design and locations of the pavilions are shown here. The Smithsonian has indicated that permanent screening pavilions are no longer part of the long-term plan for the zoo, and that the entry process at the retained entrances, shown in blue and orange on this map, would not be changed. The zoo would continue its current practice of screening visitors only during periods of high visitation and or high risk, which is typically for 2 weeks during the spring, and will continue to allow access through all 6 points of entry during these screening processes. The only physical changes proposed at entries as part of this revised submission would be at the bus lot entry and 3 second entries, identified here with orange arrows. Each of these would have arched signage to assist with visitor wayfinding from the parking lots. Elevations of these signs are shown on the right. The front of the sign would welcome visitors to the zoo, and the back would thank visitors for their support of conservation efforts. The entrances at Connecticut Avenue and the lower zoo are already well delineated, and no additional signage is proposed there. I'd next like to move on to the second component of the project, which is intended to close some gaps in the existing perimeter fencing. Before I review the new fencing, I first want to review the existing fencing that's been installed in various locations to meet some different objectives over time. The image on this slide shows the extent of existing fencing, as well as the main zoo area that would be secured as part of this project, which is indicated with the red shading. The outermost layer of existing fencing is shown here with a red dashed line and secures the zoo's property line, which reaches out across Rock Creek and Beach Drive. During a reaccreditation process with the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, it was determined that the perimeter fencing in red was unable to meet animal containment needs because of gaps at 3 locations. 2 where Rock Creek flows through the north and south ends of the site, which is marked with the blue line, and a 3rd where the Harvard Road Bridge crosses into the zoo to the east. Because of these gaps, the boundary fencing could not effectively contain zoo animals in the event of an escape or protect them from surrounding wildlife. To address this deficiency, the Smithsonian submitted a containment fencing project for commission review and approval in July of 2012, which is shown on this map in purple. While this fencing meets the zoo's animal containment needs, you can see that certain areas along North Road still have open access to the central zoo. The current proposal seeks to close this fencing gap, which will allow the zoo to better manage entry and exit from the zoo in the event of a security threat or an incident, such as a lost visitor. This slide shows the overall site plan for the proposed fencing. The dashed lines on the map show existing fencing, and the solid lines show the proposed fencing. The different colors indicate different fence types, as shown on the legend. The plan also shows the entrances that would be retained under this revised proposal. I'll review each area of existing and proposed fencing in detail in a moment, but first want to note that all proposed fencing will be visually similar to fencing that's already installed at the zoo, and that in general, ornamental fencing, which is shown here in red and purple, is proposed in more visible areas, and that more porous chain link fencing is going to be used in areas that are hidden from view or more densely vegetated, and those are shown in the blue lines. Zoo staff has also indicated that the alignment will avoid impacts to any desirable native tree species, and that any undesirable, non-native, or invasive species may be removed as part of the effort. They've also stated that their tree replacement policy dictates that any trees would be replaced at a minimum 1-to-1 ratio to maintain the tree canopy. I'll next review the proposed fencing by segment, along with submitted renderings that demonstrate visibility of the fence from key viewpoints, which are marked on each map as a green circle. This first segment of fence is at the northwest corner of the zoo, at the intersection of Connecticut Avenue and North Road. This is adjacent to the main entrance and visitor center. 8 to 12 foot tall black vinyl coated chain link fencing is proposed for this location, which, as shown in the rendering, would run along the ridge of the hillside adjacent to areas of vegetation. Continuing around the zoo, the second segment would run from the visitor center to the bus drop-off. This segment would use a new fence type. This is an 8 foot tall vehicular rated ornamental fence, which would be used in visible locations along the roadway susceptible to vehicle ramming. It would be similar in style to the existing ornamental fencing used at the zoo, with the exception of larger post sizes and horizontal reinforcing channels and cables that help meet crash rating standards. It would connect to the east to a tall wooden stockade fence, shown with a dashed orange line, which is used to shield a maintenance area from public view. As can be seen in the rendering, this segment of fencing would separate an internal walking path of the zoo from North Road and the outer zoo perimeter. Continuing along the perimeter, the fencing on the third segment would connect at the west to the bus drop-off entrance and would extend along the American Prairie exhibit in North Road. Because of its proximity to the road, it would also use the vehicular rated ornamental fencing. Regarding segment 4, the commission may recall that the zoo had initially proposed a central parking facility that would consolidate parking at parking lot C, which is across North Road to the east. And that parking lot B, which is shown here, would eventually be converted to animal exhibit space. Accordingly, the initial plans for this site showed permanent fencing along North Road with temporary fencing along the inside of the parking lot, which would have been removed with the completion of the parking garage. Since that time, the Smithsonian has decided not to proceed with the public-private partnership that would have built the parking facility, and as such, parking will be retained at parking lot B for the foreseeable future. Permanent pedestrian fencing is shown in this submission to reflect that change, though the Smithsonian has indicated its intent to conduct a comprehensive update to the National Zoo Master Plan in the future, which would include a transportation component that would reconsider some long-term parking needs, including revisiting this idea of a parking garage. Moving past parking lot B, another new segment of chain link fencing is proposed opposite parking lot C, which will be constructed through the dense vegetation in this area and not visible. Since the central parking facility is no longer proposed at this site, zoo access from parking lot C would not change under this proposal, which is currently provided through the ramp onto Olmsted Walk shown in the rendering here. Near the zoo's power plant, a modified chain link fence would be built upon existing flood control walls, which would serve to isolate the power plant from the main zoo. And the last segment of fencing on this side of the zoo is the purple area highlighted here. The existing ornamental fencing in this location would be replaced with vehicular rated fencing to prevent ramming across the Harvard Street Bridge. Because of the minimal visual difference between the pedestrian and vehicular fencing, staff believes that this change will not affect the overall character of this segment of fence. Continuing past the existing fencing at the lower zoo entrance to the other side of the zoo, vehicular rated fencing would be used to secure the pedestrian walkway along the zoo's Amazonia exhibit. This segment of fencing would connect to existing ornamental fencing to the east and existing chain link fencing in the vegetation to the west. As noted earlier in the presentation, this is the only area of the zoo where a public access point would be closed without an adjacent entry alternative. This rendering on the slide also shows the planted area that visitors must navigate to enter the zoo at this location. The crosswalk on the right side of the image leads to a low fence that is intended for staff use, and the gate on the left is intended for use by service vehicles. In conclusion, it's the Executive Director's recommendation that the Commission approves the preliminary and final site development plans for supplemental perimeter fencing. Notes that the Smithsonian is consolidating redundant points of entry throughout the zoo to enhance safety and security, improve wayfinding for visitors, and better protect the animal collection. Noting that public access will be retained at the three main entrances and from each parking lot, and that access routes from adjacent neighborhoods will not change. Notes that the Smithsonian has conducted public outreach regarding the project, and based on public concerns and an assessment of security needs and risks, is no longer considering permanent security screening pavilions as part of this project. Notes that the zoo will continue to screen visitors only during periods of high visitation and or high risk, and that access will be allowed at all 6 points of entry during these screening periods. Notes that the Smithsonian is not moving forward with plans for the central parking facility, and that the fencing and entry points have been modified to reflect this change. And finally, notes that the Smithsonian has indicated its intent to update the National Zoo Master Plan in the future, which would consider long-term parking needs and revisit the idea of a structured parking facility, and that this process would include opportunities for public input and comment. So that concludes my presentation. I'm available to answer any questions, as is staff from the Smithsonian and the National Zoo. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gerbich. Mr. Gerbich, I am going to ask you to go back related to a question. There was some commotion right around a critical point in your presentation, and I'll ask you to repeat. Back to where you were describing the Amazonia entrance, if you could
earlier.
please, way back, yeah. The pedestrian. Yeah,
Kind of this one,
right.
this one.
Could you just walk us through it again, please? I'm
Yeah.
sorry, but this is very, we got a lot of comment. And by the way, is this the same entrance that is referred to also the alternate path to the tunnel? Or is,
Yeah, they're kind of connected ideas. You'll see I'll kind of go through this slide, and then on the next slide you can see exactly where that segment goes, and I can show you exactly where it kind of
Okay,
would
thank you.
cross through the tunnel if it's closed.
thank you.
Okay, so this again is just an area of the zoo. This is really the only point of entry that would have no access right here. It would kind of change the way people get into the zoo. The rest of them kind of consolidate entry at a nearby location. And that's shown here on the red circle. So the zoo has indicated that this entrance really is intended to provide access for staff and service vehicles, and it was never really intended as a public entrance, though folks that do use this trail sometimes kind of cut across the service road and into the zoo from this back entrance. Now, there are a couple gates there that are typically closed, so to kind of get through, you have to go through a planter bed. So it's not very clearly noted as a public entrance, though folks have been using it that way. So related to the trail itself, the trail here is shown in pink. So this is a segment of trail that bypasses a tunnel that goes through along Beach Drive. It's a pretty narrow stretch. There's not a lot of real estate there to allow passing. So this is a more standard kind of multi-use trail that goes around the Research Hill site for the zoo, shown in pink. So whereas people would now kind of go through that red circle, this is kind of redirecting folks to go then through the lower zoo, follow that pink line back onto the main trail. So you can get my pointer and I'll show you. So
And point out where the tunnel is also, how that comes through, please.
sure, so this is where the segment starts,
Yeah.
and this is where the tunnel cuts through.
Okay.
So essentially, during the hours that this is open, you go this way and around, and it's a much better experience for pedestrians and for bikes.
And did you indicate that that will still be open during the zoo's hours of operation?
Yeah, so on a totally unrelated project, it's actually closed right now for repairs, though that will reopen when those repairs are completed, and it would operate the same way under this project. So nothing would change with the hours that it's open, though it does have to be closed for certain hours related to the zoo's accreditation. They have to have it closed when the zoo's closed generally. And then it kind of allows them also opportunities to get maintenance and service vehicles kind of to and from this kind of staff area here on Research Hill and their main zoo area, including moving animals.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Yes.
Just going back to the tunnel, so my understanding is that, and just from a little bit of research, that there's been a lot of problems with the tunnel over the years, and like different flooding and things down there. But one of the concerns with people going through the tunnel, especially on bikes, is it's like a very, very narrow sidewalk. So is part of the unrelated project going on right now going to alter the sidewalks or make that tunnel any more user-friendly for people to get through walking or biking?
So as far as I understand about the tunnel, I think that was done as part of a different project to kind of reclaim as much space as you really could for operational purposes on the roadway. The rehab project for the trail is specifically just the segment of trail that goes around Research Hill, and I think it's related to kind of flooding damage and what's been going on with that.
Okay, well, what is the state of the sidewalk going through the tunnel now? I mean, is it a very narrow sidewalk? Is it something that can be used if this other access way is not as convenient?
So, I mean, it's a Park Services tunnel. It's still not a great passage, but it's kind of the best that we can do with vehicles and pedestrians and cyclists all in the same space. We did make some changes to the bridge there, because when you come out of the tunnel on the south side, it's immediately there's a bridge, and we shifted lanes and consolidated, try to get a little more space there. And we did get a approval for a new pedestrian bridge that would parallel that, and that'll be an improvement. So, I mean, we are trying to make improvements for pedestrians and cyclists, but when it comes to the tunnel, there's a limit, and so we do want this alternate route to be open as much as it can possibly be. Wouldn't want to have anything changed to reduce that.
So before we have discussion, we do have Mr. Steve Montfort here, who's the director of the National Zoo, who's asked to provide a few comments. So welcome, Mr. Montfort.
Well, thank you very much. My name is Steve Montfort. I'm the director of the Smithsonian's National Zoo and Conservation Biology Institute, and thank you very much for your good presentation, and to all of you for hosting us today for this meeting. First thing I would say is I'm relatively new in the position. I became permanent in September of last year. I was acting during the time when this all came up. It's been quite a good learning experience for me. What I learned is that our community loves the zoo a lot, and it's their park as well as their zoo. So we're a 139-year-old zoo, but we're also the park of the city and the neighbors that live around us. And so to me, we did have meetings, and some of them were pretty tough. People asked hard questions, were pretty unhappy with some of the things that were going on. And so it was a really valuable experience for us to take the time to meet with them, to hear their concerns. My primary responsibility is really for the safety and security of the animals and the people who work there, as well as our visitors. And so when you break it down, we have about 2,000 animals of 400 species. some of which are some of the rarest animals on Earth. You see my giant panda tie I'm wearing today. But included in that are about 600 employees and nearly 2 million visitors every year. So, it is a fact of life that security is on our mind, safety is on our mind all the time. And so we're really trying to balance the visitor experience and access with safety and security. And that's been our goal. And so in listening to the public, we did make adjustments. We heard loud and clear what they had to say. They don't want screening stations. They think it's too much, too far. And so we've taken that off the table. That was something that was proposed as a possibility, but we've now completely taken that off the table. I'm just reiterating what John had said. We have no plans to do permanent entry pavilions of any sort. And also, we have no plans to do permanent screening year-round. But we do reserve the right to do screening when law enforcement and tells us we have credible threats, and we'll take those into account and make adjustments. Otherwise, the screening will only occur as it's been occurring for the last few years during spring break for a couple of weeks. The new entry points, in our mind, going from 13 entry points down to 6, we think is a reasonable balance between access and security and safety. We're the only zoo in the United States with 13 entry points. And we're one of the only zoos that has a public road that drives through our zoo. And so that does create different complications and threats that we're taking into account here. I'll just briefly comment on the bike path and the access point down at the bottom of the zoo, the Amazonia point that's referenced. That has never been a public entry point. In fact, that's a service road. And if you drive down there, it says no entry. So there's not supposed to be, a public that's behind the scenes for the zoo. It's a service area. It is an area that's convenient for somebody coming off the trail, but as was stated, they're walking through an area that's not an entry point. In fact, there's big planters that are there that were put there, for security, and people are just walking through the planters. So it's not sometimes open. It's not ever open. It's not supposed to be ever open. So that, and as far as the path goes, we're really pleased to have the path that come through our property, and we're happy to cooperate on having access to it, but we don't control the path. It's a DDOT responsibility for the maintenance and the upkeep of that. One of the entry points is on the Park Service side, and we've pledged to keep that open and closed at our normal operating hours once it's been repaired. It's totally unsafe right now to be used by anyone. And at that time, we'll resume that practice. And so closing those entry points at the end of the day is what secures the perimeter for our accreditation purposes to make sure that that people don't come in and that animals don't go out. So that's part of our accreditation responsibility. So I'm happy to answer any other questions that you might have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Montfort. Any discussion or questions? Yes, Ms. Matthews.
Mr. Chairman, a question for you. Are there specific security incidents that you've had in the past that have caused you to take these steps or propose these steps?
Yes, there were a number of incidents that occurred. We provided background information on that to the commission previously, but I don't know what level of detail you'd like to hear now. But there were incidents with shooting and also a stabbing that occurred across different years starting in 2014. And in response to neighborhood concerns and consultation with the neighbors, this is when we came up with the plan to do the temporary screening. It was one idea that somebody had said that these incidents occurred off the grounds of the zoo, which is true, but they began on the grounds, and so they were incidents related to some gang activity, youth disturbances, and so on. And these folks were pushed out of the zoo and into the community where the violence occurred, right across the street. So it was, these were very serious incidences that occurred during that specific time frame.
Thank you. So there's a basis for why you're proposing
Yes.
what you're proposing.
Yes, wouldn't have been our preferred, route to go, but once we had not just one incident, but two very serious, violent incidents, it was, we thought it was the credible thing to do.
And if you could characterize the community's concerns, were you able to mitigate or address the top concerns that were raised?
Yeah, specific to this project, the main issue with the fencing project had to do with, people were concerned about screening becoming a full-time, and inhibiting their free access to the zoo. That was clearly their primary concern related to this project. Certainly, we heard lots of other issues, which are all ongoing and real things, like congestion on Connecticut Avenue, for example. Access to the bike trail, our hours of operation. I mean, all those things are not new. Those are not new challenges for us, and they're things we're still hoping to be able to improve or mitigate. And so we know the community is concerned about those things. So those were all brought up when we had the open meetings, the town halls, and so on. It wasn't just the security fencing. All these other issues were also raised at the same time. So we're aware of them, and we've done some things on. One of the biggest things when the parking garage wasn't approved, or we decided not to proceed with the parking garage. We expected to have a lot of comments about that at their open hearing. There were very few, actually, and everything backs up to congestion on Connecticut Avenue. So we've been working with the ANCs and with DDOT and with Metro Police, and we've come up with some initial solutions. If you come up to the zoo on Connecticut as you approach our main entry point on North Road, they've eliminated the parking meters along the north side of the road, and that allows less congestion with cars, parking there, so it'll be easier for entry. That's a small thing, but it's something we could do quickly. So we did that in partnership with various stakeholders, and so that's a first step. We're still looking for other things to do. We know we have to deal with with the congestion issue and with access to the zoo, and it's something. It's going to be a big challenge for us. We're going to have to go back to it and look at other alternatives through our master planning process.
But with respect to what's being considered today, right here now, access to the zoo was a primary concern.
That was the
and you're
number one thing.
preserving,
Yeah.
perhaps-
Keep it open. We don't want screening. We don't want to wait. It's not necessary, et cetera. Those were the main complaints. And then the secondary complaints really relate to the things that you heard on the public comments this time, which was a lot of bikers, concerned that they don't have access to the bike trail, and so I think two things are being mixed up a little. Is that the bike trail is closed right now, and that is frustrating for people. It's not something that we control. The only issue related to this project was whether or not the entry at the bottom of the zoo by Amazonia, that we're closing that down. And I just want to reiterate that that's not a public entry point.
Right.
It's on a service road. There's a dangerous curve as you go across the bridge there. It's just really not a great place for pedestrians or people on bikes to be traveling.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions or comments? Please, Ms. White.
I was just going to say, welcome to the zoo. I really appreciate hearing your experience and your learning curve. I can imagine it was pretty steep. And from the last time I saw this plan, I think it's greatly improved. So I appreciate the outreach with the community and trying to work out a solution that meets both.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Anything else?
Okay, I also want to thank you for the flexibility and having heard some of the input. And it does reflect in the revised plan. We appreciate that very much.
Okay, thank you.
Well, at this point, may I entertain a motion to approve the preliminary and final site development plans for this project? And second? Yes, thank you. Okay, having been seconded, I'd like to ask if those in favor please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you very much. The motion is carried. Thank you very much. Next on the open session is Agenda Item 6B, approval of comments on concept designs for the construction of the WMATA Escalator Canopies at 5 locations in Washington, submitted by the National Park Service. I believe Mr. Fliss, welcome, and look forward to your presentation.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. The Washington Metropolitan Transit Authority, or WMATA, has submitted Phase 4 of the Escalator Canopy Program for your review. This is a concept review, so you are providing feedback to the applicant. They will ultimately return back with their final selections for the various sites that we'll discuss today. So So WMATA is seeking comments on exterior canopies at 5 Metrorail stations that are located in or near National Park Service sites. The 5 sites are Archives, Navy Memorial Penn Quarter, Arlington Cemetery, both the north and south entrances, Judiciary Square North, the Smithsonian North entrance, and the U Street African American Civil War Memorial East entrance. And these are highlighted here in red. WMATA's objectives for the Canopy Program are to comply with current building codes, improve escalator reliability, protect riders from rain, ice, and snow, and provide design excellence appropriate for an entrance for the metro rail system of the nation's capital. Overall, we find these objectives are consistent with the goals of the comprehensive plan, which include improving regional mobility as well as the visitor experience. And we recommend the Commission support WMATA's objectives. The prototype canopy design, which you're all familiar with, was selected by WMATA in 2001 and created by Lori and Chenoweth. It was also approved by the Commission of Fine Arts and NCPC. The design provides an iconic image that reflects the vaulted torus form of the Metrorail, original underground Metrorail stations. It also provides uniform shedding of weather with a minimal footprint. And it also sits on the existing parapet wall, so this makes it easy to install and also limits impacts to station users. The canopies themselves are constructed with bolted joints. This allows for quick assembly. There's limited site welding, and therefore there's no interruption of service. The designs are also adaptable, and so they've been used on a variety of different station openings with different sizes and lengths. So as I mentioned, the prototype canopy design was approved by NCPC for use at all exterior uncovered Metrorail entrances with the exception of 8 locations. And these 8, the Commission requested be individually submitted for review. These sites included those near important historic buildings, near memorials, or within parks and open spaces such as the National Mall. 2 of these sites, Gallery Place and DuPont North, were approved by the Commission in 2014. In both instances, the prototypical design was modified to address specific issues related to the context of those 2 sites. A 3rd site, Cleveland Park, was also approved with a variation to the prototype design. I think in that case it was actually a little bit narrower. And that leaves the 5 remaining sites which we're talking about today. I'll also note that if new canopies are not provided for these stations, the existing escalators ultimately will need to be removed and replaced with stairs. Current code requirements do not allow for the escalators to be exposed to the rain and snow, and as you know, this causes issues with safety. Therefore, the canopies will provide weather protection to station users, but also allow them to continue to be operated as escalators. The locations that we're discussing today required further study to better understand the potential impacts on view sheds, historic resources, and other contextual issues in these important settings. For this evaluation, WMATA retained the prototype design as option 1, that's here at the top of the screen, and developed 2 modified versions for consideration at each of the sites. In general, the biggest difference between these 3 options really is the height of the canopy at the top. For example, in option 1, this is based upon the Archives Memorial, Navy Memorial Station. The maximum height at the top is 20 feet. For option 2, which is in the middle, it's about 17.5 feet in height. And then option 3 is the lowest at about 15 feet. So you can see they progressively get lower. And for all the stations, the heights vary in size, but this general progression applies. I'll also note that the drawings do seem to show some difference in the size of the structural members. We've since clarified that the structural supports will all be the same size, so I just want to make that point clear amongst all the options. WMATA also developed some other design options, including a V-brace design, tree branches, as well as a glass wedge design, to kind of further explore some of the options for these sites. After further discussions with the participating agencies, including NCPC staff and others, these options were dismissed. In general, they were deemed really to be too different from the design language of the metro rail system, and therefore wouldn't provide that unified wayfinding that everybody's really familiar with across the system. So again, the prototype canopy design shown here with its vaulted form, reminiscent of the underground station, is highly recognizable to the public. And as I mentioned, in some stations, DuPont Circle and Cleveland Park, this design has been modified in a way to really accommodate site-specific issues. In the case of the 5 sites that we're discussing today, these issues could relate to the context, impacts to views, and view sheds. And as such, staff recommends the Commission find that the canopy design prototype should be utilized at all station entrances, but that modifications may be appropriate at those entrances where the context or potential visual impacts may require some variation. So as I mentioned, option 2 in the middle has been modified to lower the profile to respond to some of these issues as compared to the prototype. And while some limited changes to the prototype might be appropriate, more substantial deviations like those other options I just mentioned probably wouldn't be appropriate in the site. And as such, in general, staff believes that option 3, which is the lowest and the flattest of the design, is likely not appropriate for these sites because of its flattened appearance, which is a significant change from the existing canopy design. And further, it doesn't provide that sense of openness that's necessary for an entrance to an underground station. So as I walk you through this, all the sites, you're going to see all 3 options for comparison purposes and for discussion, although at this point we don't really feel that option 3 is really appropriate for any of them. So with that as background, I'm going to walk you through each of the 5 sites, first starting with Archives Navy Memorial. Here you can see the entrance and plan. This is highlighted in yellow, located just east of the memorial. And then here you can see views with the proposed option 1. Again, this is the prototype design for this site. Here you can see option 2, which again is a little bit lower in profile. And then here is option 3, which is the lowest and the flattest. And here you can see them all side by side for comparison purposes. This is a highly urban site, and the station is heavily used. There are higher density mixed-use buildings in the site that are generally not historic. And the space is relatively large and open. Further, the station is also located outside of those important Pennsylvania Avenue and 10th Street view sheds. So overall, staff recommends that the Commission find that option 1 is appropriate for this site, as the canopy is in an urban area, would not impact any historic buildings, and would not significantly impact any important view sheds. So moving on to Arlington Cemetery Station. This station actually has 2 entrances, one on either side of Memorial Avenue. The station is located about halfway between Memorial Circle, which is located there in the upper right, and the Women in Military Service for America Memorial. Memorial Avenue, along with Arlington Memorial Bridge, is an important symbolic and commemorative landscape that connects the Lincoln Memorial and Arlington House. And of course, the adjacent cemetery also influences the character of this site. So here you can see some other images looking down the corridor. I'm sure most of you are familiar with this. And then here are the renderings showing the various options. So here you can see option 1, again with the prototype canopy. And then again, because there are 2 station entrances, you're seeing it on both sides of the avenue. Here's option 2 with a partially modified canopy. And then here's option 3 with the fully modified. And then here again, you can see them all side by side. The lack of canopies currently for this station is particularly challenging for visitors because they can be difficult to find. So we do think that the new canopies will improve wayfinding for this location. However, the setting within the Memorial Avenue corridor is also an important view shed, looking towards the Lincoln Memorial, as well as a historic setting. As a result, we think option 2 appears to be the best selection, as a slightly lower profile of the canopy can minimize impacts to these views, while still providing that wayfinding that's necessary for a Metro Rail entrance. And therefore, we do recommend that the Commission find that option 2 is appropriate for this station. Next, moving on to Judiciary Square North Station. This is highlighted here. You can see the entrance is located just north of and within the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial, and just south of the National Building Museum, which is designated as a National Historic Landmark. The station is also located along that visual axis that connects the District of Columbia Court of Appeals building, which is just south of this image, with the National Building Museum, and actually further south towards the mall. So here you can see some renderings showing the application of option 1. Again, you can see the canopy in relationship to the National Building Museum. Here's option 2. And then here you can see option 3, which is the lowest. Given this view shed in the context, we do think option 2 is the best approach. It's a lower height will help minimize those impacts on views both north and south. And we do think that this is the best approach for this particular site. I will note that the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial has expressed concerns about potential canopy options here, and they think that additional coordination is necessary with WMATA to ensure a design that's appropriate for the memorial setting. So given this, we do recommend the Commission request WMATA conduct additional coordination with the memorial to understand their concerns, and by extension, this would also include the Park Service, as this is a Park Service site. Next, we have the Smithsonian Station. This is located in the National Mall. Again, it's screened by hedges and surrounded by trees. This is another station that can be particularly hard for visitors to find. So here you can see option 1. Again, this is the prototype. Option 2, which is the slightly modified. And then option 3, which is the lowest. So in this location, the canopy could impact views along the National Mall, including the Smithsonian Castle and towards the Washington Monument. Given this, option 2 appears to be the best choice. The slightly lower profile could help minimize impacts to these views while still providing that wayfinding that's necessary for the station entrance. And therefore, we do recommend the Commission support option 2. And then finally, we have the U Street African American Civil War Memorial Station. This is a station located just north of the memorial itself within a mixed-use kind of urban context. So again, here are the renderings of the various options. This is option 1. Here you can see option 2. And then finally, the option 3, the lowest. So as I mentioned, this station entrance is located in a plaza area. It is relatively small. I believe it's the smallest of the ones we're looking at, with only 2 escalators. In addition, it's set back from the memorial itself. It aligns with the primary sculptural elements of the memorial. It looks directly at it. As such, we do believe that option 1, the prototype design, appears to be the best for this location, given that it's set back and it's relatively small within the context. Overall, staff appreciates the work of WMATA to evaluate these important sites, as well as the consideration of the various design options for each location. We do think that the exploration of these different options within the sites really helped to better understand some of the particular issues facing them as they proceed to build out the remaining station entrances. And so therefore, it's the Executive Director's recommendation that the Commission support WMATA's objectives for the Canopy program. Notes that the canopy prototypes have served as a successful wayfinding strategy for the Metro Rail system throughout the district. Finds the canopy design should be used in all station entrances, but that variations may be necessary depending on the context. Notes that WMATA has developed 3 canopy designs for consideration at each of the 5 sites. Finds that option 3 is generally not appropriate due to its flattened appearance, and because it deviates most significantly from the original canopy design. Finds option 1 is appropriate for the Archives Navy Memorial Station. Finds option 2 is appropriate for the Arlington Cemetery Station. Option 3 is maybe most appropriate for Judiciary Square, but requests WMATA continue to coordinate with the National Law Enforcement Memorial. Finds option 2 is appropriate for the Smithsonian North Station, option 1 for the U Street Station, and recommends the applicant explore ways to design option 2 to provide additional overhang for the design. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions. We also have WMATA here, as well as their design team, to help assist in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fliss. Before I introduce Mr. Davis Buckley, who will speak, I'd just like to shout out to the design team who I think really created an elegant and functional and iconic design all at the same time. It's a very significant challenge, so thank you very much. So we have Mr. Davis Buckley, who's here on behalf of the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial, and Mr. Buckley, you have 5 minutes to speak.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Commission members. I'm Davis Buckley. I'm the architect of the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial, and most recently, the architect of the museum, which is immediately south of the memorial. I'm here today on behalf of the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund. We just recently learned WMATA proposed to build the canopy over the escalator over the north entrance of the memorial. The Memorial Fund was not contacted by WMATA about the design of the proposed canopy. When this was brought to WMATA's attention, they agreed to meet with the Memorial Fund and me to discuss the impact of the canopy on the memorial setting. Ivo is here, and we've had conversations about this, and we plan to meet this coming week. We have shared our drawings with WMATA, who we understand is in the process of developing additional views of the canopy within the memorial setting. The meeting has been scheduled, as I mentioned, next week on the 13th, with WMATA, the National Park Service, the Memorial Fund, and myself to review the matter on point. This is to advise that the Memorial Fund and I concur with staff's recommendation for us to coordinate further with WMATA to further study the impact of the proposed canopy and to discuss any potential mitigation or modifications that may be appropriate given this important setting. I look forward to returning to the Commission along with WMATA and report out a agreement, a satisfactory approach to how we can best resolve this. Thank you very much, and I greatly appreciate your time and consideration. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you very much, Mr. Buckley. Any questions for Mr. Buckley?
Thank you.
Thank you. So open up to discussion or comments. Mr. Matthews.
A quick question for you. Are they, the three options, are they functionally equivalent in terms of what the protection they provide and cost? And also, is the primary purpose of the canopy, besides the wayfinding, to protect the escalators?
It's, yes,
And
weather protection.
WMATA or somebody can talk about the cost implications of that.
Good afternoon, members of the Commission. My name is Ivo Kralimov. I am a Director of Architecture at WMATA. The primary purpose of installation of a canopy over the escalators is compliance with the code. I think the code was changed in 1998 to include a provision for any escalator that is actually installing the exterior of the building to be covered for protection from the rain. So that has been the driver for WMATA's Board of Directors to make a decision in 2001 for installation of canopies over the escalator entrances. The secondary function, which was mentioned here, is the wayfinding element has evolved after the first installation has started, and essentially at this point we have canopy installation at over 40 sites. So that escalator canopy has become a prominent feature identifiable with the entrance to the metro rail stations.
Any other questions or comments on this? Sensing no other discussion, I'll ask if there's a motion to approve the comments on concept design. Any second? Second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Next on the open session is Agenda Item 6C, approval of preliminary and final site and building plans for the rehabilitation of Franklin School as the new home for Planet Word. I'll note that the Franklin School became a National Historic Landmark in 1996. Ms. Sullivan is going to present this soon.
Good afternoon, members of the Commission. The District of Columbia Office of the Deputy Mayor for Planning and Economic Development has submitted preliminary and final plans for the rehabilitation of the Franklin School for your review. Once rehabilitated, the Franklin School will house the experiential museum, Planet Word. And here's the Franklin School today. Located in northwest DC, the school sits across from Franklin Park, northeast of the White House and west of the Convention Center. It fronts on 13th Street Northwest between K Street to the north and I Street to the south. Much of the focus of today's presentation will be on the new plaza entrance located on the back side of the building, as you see here. And here's a view of the school from 13th Street, and you can see the two historic entrances. And this is the view from K Street. And again, here's the entrance plaza that we'll be talking about today. The Franklin School was constructed in 1869 and designed by Adolph Kloos. Kloos designed many public buildings in Washington between 1860 and 1890, including the Smithsonian Arts and Industries Building as well as Eastern Market on Capitol Hill. Kloos characterized the architecture of the Franklin School as Renaissance Revival, also incorporating elements of Romanesque and Gothic styles. Once completed, the Franklin School is one of 8 modern urban public school buildings constructed in Washington between 1862 and 1865. In addition, Alexander Graham Bell conducted wireless communication experiments in the building in 1880. In 1925, the school was discontinued and it became the Franklin Administration Building occupied by the Board of Education until 1968. The Franklin School was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1973 and became a National Historic Landmark in 1996. While there are over 90,000 listings on the National Register of Historic Places, only about 2,500 are recognized as National Historic Landmarks. The building was last in use by the district as a homeless shelter from 2002 to 2008, and it has been vacant since. If you recall from the Commission's concept review of the project in December of 2017, most of the renovations are interior to the building. In August of 2018, prior to the conclusion of the Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act consultation process, and without proper building permits, the applicant removed significant amounts of interior historic fabric from the school. The consulting parties, including the District of Columbia State Historic Preservation Office, the National Park Service, the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, the Department of Consumer and Regulatory Affairs, and NCPC, the lead agency for Section 106, determined that the removal of historic fabric and other aspects of the project constituted adverse effects on the school. To address the extensive removal of interior historic fabric, a memorandum of agreement was prepared in consultation with the consulting parties to mitigate the adverse effects. It requires the replication of many of the character-defining features that you see listed here and lays out the review and consultation process for the rest of the project. Now, while most of the MOA deals with mitigation on the interior of the building, which NCPC does not review, it was necessary for us to execute the MOA because of our Section 106 responsibility. So with the execution of the MOA, NCPC can move forward with its review on the project. The submission for preliminary and final design includes 3 areas of discussion: the entry plaza, signs, and lighting. So as previously mentioned, the applicant is proposing a new entrance plaza at K Street. The plaza will be built over the existing rear courtyard area, as you see here, with the area adjacent to the south alley to be retained for trash collection and dumpsters. The remaining area under the new plaza will house administrative and back-of-house spaces. So just to show you, and if let me get my pointer up here. Is there a pointer? This, underneath this level right here is where you'll have the plaza will sit up at this level, basically. And on the left, you can see the existing view here from K Street, and on the right is the proposed rendering of the new entry plaza. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit here, and this is a closer look. And I'll discuss that now in more detail. So the plaza design addresses existing site constraints related to a change in grade and limited space, and includes 2 primary terraces, 2 sets of stairs, and an accessible ramp that begins parallel to K Street before ascending along the rear of the plaza. It allows all visitors a way to come into the building at the same point of entrance. The design also creates a gathering space around the new artwork in the plaza and allows for groups to collect and gather before entering the museum. The surface of the plaza is paved with narrow concrete pavers of similar proportion to the brick and in a neutral gray color palette. The planters along the west and southern edges of the plaza are concrete formed structures clad with rectilinear stone in a gray color palette. And here's an overhead, an aerial rendering of the plaza with the ramp and the 2 sets of stairs that bring you up to the building entrance. The applicant has engaged an artist to design the new plaza sculpture and plaza gate. A sculptural metal tree called the Speaking Willow will be located on the entrance plaza. It will have speakers hanging from the branches, and as people approach the tree, the speakers will murmur various languages from around the world. The speakers will consist of polycarbonate opaque bells in a light gray, and the base of the tree will have a brushed metal finish, either in steel or aluminum. And you may also notice the vine intertwined throughout the sculpture. This will be a living vine, species to be determined, that will be planted at the base of the sculpture underneath the seat. Other features of the design include stainless steel handrails for the ramp and stairs, a screening wall at the south end of the plaza, adjacent to the loading area, and a screening partition located along the eastern property line. As staff noted in the concept review, the site and building plans include removing the existing wall along K Street. Staff determined with the applicant, the DC State Historic Preservation Office and the National Park Service, that the wall was constructed after the end of the building's period of significance in 1926, and therefore it is not considered a historic character defining feature of the building. The artist developed the new entry gate off K Street to be reminiscent of an open book. The gate reflects the desire of the museum to be secure during off hours while allowing people to view the plaza through the semi-porous gate design. The Speaking Willow sculpture will be visible with the gate in its open and closed position. And here is the view with the gate open. Both sides of the gate are anticipated to be open when the museum is open. The gate is not structurally attached to the Franklin School. Staff, in consultation with the MOA signatories, requested that the gate be set back approximately ½ a foot from the building's wall so they do not read as part of the original historic composition of the building. At the gate center, the 2 sides intersect at approximately an approximate height of 7 feet. The gate is activated using a manual crank system hidden within the rectangular posts on each side of the gate. The material of the gate in quartz gray steel references the historical wrought iron gates that decorate the Franklin School, but in a contemporary expression. The proposed plan includes the removal of limited masonry between 3 windows on the rear elevation of the first floor to allow access to the new entrance vestibule on the patio. The glass vestibule is proportioned in height and depth to work within the existing masonry proportions. Staff finds that the frameless glass system allows the focus of the plaza to be the Speaking Willow, the planter, and the plaza pavers, rather than highlighting the enclosure as a strong design element. The footprint of the vestibule enclosure allows for sufficient depth for visitors to enter and accommodate bag inspection or coat checks for events. The depth also allows for visitors with strollers or in wheelchairs to enter comfortably and allow the vestibule doors to close. Thus, overall, staff recommends The commission find the proposed new entrance plaza off K Street over the existing rear courtyard and the new entrance vestibule on the rear of the building are appropriate as they allow universal access while avoiding significant alterations to the historic facade. Now, at concept review, the commission also requested additional information on exterior lighting changes and signage. The applicant has looked at several sign precedents for inspiration. And you can see a few more here. The applicant initially explored the use of 4 banner signs for the museum. However, after further study of existing trees, other sidewalk signs, and the traffic control lights, the applicant has refined this proposal. For this review, the applicant is requesting 1 freestanding perpendicular vertical banner sign located near the new entrance at K Street and 2 freestanding vertical monument signs, 1 at the corner of 13th and K and 1 located on the existing landing between the stairs at the 13th Street elevation. There will also be a sign for the restaurant in the southwest planter area. Staff finds that the proposed freestanding exterior signs will provide needed identification for the building's new use as Planet Word. The orange fabric banner sign at the main entrance on K Street will be attached to an 11-foot steel pole in a color matching the gate. It'll be 3.5 by 11 feet in dimensions with text that reads, "Planet Word, the museum where language comes to life." The 2 monument signs will have the same text as the banner in addition to a directive to enter on K Street. The monument sign located at the corner of K and 13th Street will be 3.5 by 8 feet tall. It will be visible walking along either K or 13th Street. Staff initially inquired about having 2 monument signs at this location, each perpendicular to the cross streets. However, the building yard is too small to accommodate the signs in those locations. The widest point of the building yard is at the corner of the octagonal turret, which is where this sign is located. Now, the second monument sign is located on the landing at 13th Street, and it will be 3 by 7 feet. This is really the only place a sign can be located with the lack of building yard and desire to not affix a sign to the building. You may recall that during concept review, the commission requested retaining one of the 2 historic main entrances on the west facade facing Franklin Square as a functional entrance into the building along 13th Street here. In response, the applicant will retain the south entrance for visitor use, primarily egress, but one could also enter from this set of doors. While the applicant has designed the museum entry experience around the K Street entrance to accommodate all visitors of varying mobilities, staff finds that the language to enter on K Street does not indicate a person can also use this set of stairs. Therefore, staff requests that the applicant change the language to primary entrance on on K Street to indicate people can still use the south set of stairs. The north set of stairs will be closed off with a post and chain as this set of doors will not be in use. And here's a summary of the banner and sign details. Staff notes that as the museum's needs in the future evolve, additional signage or exhibit banners may be desired and should be designed to avoid or minimize structural and visual impacts on the Franklin School and submitted for review and approval by the Commission and for consultation in accordance with the MOA. In addition, any improvements in public space will require a public space permit from the District of Columbia Department of Transportation, Office of Public Space. And finally, with regard to lighting, the applicant has confirmed that the monument signs will not be internally lit and that they will submit all exterior lighting for both the building and the signs for consultation per the MOA and to the Commission for review and approval once it has been developed. So therefore, it is the Executive Director's recommendation that the Commission approve the preliminary and final plans for the rehabilitation of the Franklin School and find that the rehabilitation of the school into a new museum, Planet Word, will provide much needed improvements for the long-term maintenance of the building and also provide visitors a quality experiential museum. I've already covered the rest of the recommendations in my presentation, so I will conclude. There are several people here to answer questions, including Ann Friedman, the founder and CEO of Planet Word, and Gretchen Fahler, the project architect.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sullivan. Do we have any comments or questions? Commissioner White.
Well, I just have to say, after reading this, it was such a disappointment to learn about the, really what seems a careless removal of the interior of the historic structure. And I was thinking, while I was reading the MOA, have we ever been in the position where we have to conduct monthly site visits to make sure that someone's in compliance with the plan? Seems like an extraordinary step, but I'm
Monthly,
glad to
monthly
see
is a
it.
lot, but the applicant has been very willing to accommodate that, and so we have been, Lee, our historic preservationist, has been doing that. So.
Good. And then just one final question. What steps have been taken by FSD, as it's referred to in here, to ensure that the interior renovations will be handled in a sensitive, appropriate manner, so we don't find anything on our monthly
Yeah,
site
actually, I
visits?
might ask Gretchen
I'd
to,
love to hear.
Gretchen, do you mind coming up and talk, or Ann, but either.
I'm Ann Friedman. I'm the CEO and manager of Franklin School Development. So.
And I'm Gretchen Fahler, the project architect with Bayer Blenderbell.
So it's far as steps being taken to ensure that nothing goes wrong and violates any of our agreements. Well, we do have monthly visits, and we're asking questions about every single thing that happens in the building. And, you know, I don't want to be here again. I don't want to apologize anymore. So I think that's my answer.
One of the specifics that's in the memorandum of agreement is there are several stipulations that itemize elements in particular that are character-defining elements in the building. So we have a list that we've compiled with the signatory consulting parties, and those are items that we've compiled with the contractor to make sure that during the monthly reviews we address them.
Thank you.
Just to follow up on that, a lot can happen in a month, right? Is the architect actually doing more regular review than that? And also a second question is, are the items that you identified marked in some way physically in the building so that the contractor doesn't make mistakes going forward?
Yes, so the areas have been clearly designated on the drawing, so areas like the main stairwells, which are being restored with the handrails and the steps, have been documented and are clearly understood. We are continuing with weekly construction meetings. We have weekly meetings, design meeting 1 week, construction meeting the following week. We also, maybe much to the chagrin of the staff at NCPC, the National Park Service, and the DHC Office of Historic Preservation, haven't been shy about not waiting for the month to come, but been asking in order to facilitate and continue on our construction schedule, asking questions about floorboard widths or approval for some of the elements that are listed. So we've been more proactive about that with them.
Wasn't quite my question. It was part of my question.
Yeah.
Part of my question was, though, about the physical marking in the building of these spaces. People can read drawings, sometimes they can't read drawings. So I was just wondering if there are other precautions that can be
I
made.
think that's something we could certainly do with Whiting Turner, is designate those areas or put some signage up so they know that these are areas that are character-defining elements or are to be treated with preservation approach. They're aware of the importance of the materials within the Great Hall as well as within the stairwells as interior spaces that retain a lot of elements that are being restored and preserved.
Thank you. I'll have other questions, but I'll wait. Yes, Commissioner.
I'm just curious, were there any items that were removed that cannot be replaced? Historic items that can't be replaced, can be replicated perhaps, but not replaced?
Either, we're doing both. And for instance, there was a pressed tin ceiling that was removed, and we are replicating it. It was damaged and full of holes and rusted and not reusable. That doesn't necessarily excuse the fact that we removed it, but it will be replicated.
Thank you.
Other questions? I have a question, sort of drawn to the entry gate. Maybe, could you start with slide 34, though, which is, go to 34. So this is the height, and I see the bottom of the blade sign is 9 feet there, right? From to the bottom of the blade sign? I think I have that right.
Yeah.
Now so I'm looking at that 9 feet, and I'm trying to compare it to the 7 feet at the center. So if you could go now to slide 24. And I think you referenced, Ms. Sullivan, that this, at the center, it would be, or maybe go one more, I'm sorry.
I know what you're, wait, hold on.
Yeah, there we go.
Right
At
here, it's my understanding this is approximately 7 feet.
I guess I'm just not
Is that
believing
correct?
that.
Yeah.
So then the far outside must be 20 feet? It just, there's something strange about the dimensions here. But anyway, I think, I can't, I look at this and I'm looking forward to April 15th. You know what April 15th is? Well, yeah, it's tax day, but that's not why I'm looking for.
Don't look forward to that.
Game of Thrones is back. And I'm feeling Game of Thrones here. I'm inspired by Game of Thrones. And I do understand that it's supposed to replicate a book, as I understood it. To me, it feels much more aggressive than that. And while I know the gate means to keep out, I'm just wondering if there's something that the artist might consider to soften it in a way that it isn't so, to me, very, very aggressive. Any thoughts about that? Is the artist able to comment?
I think if you're comfortable, we could, if Ann is comfortable, we could certainly talk to the artist about modifications to the aesthetic. Certainly, maybe there's something with the shape of the perforations or the amount of open and closed space that could be considered in discussion with the artist. The artist's not here today to discuss that. But.
When I think of a book opening up and the pages, they kind of fall a little bit. They don't necessarily stick up, right? And I love the symbolism of a book. What a perfect, and I frankly think this is a wonderful project, so don't get me wrong. But if there was a way, say at the top, instead of those page elements, if you will, to be straight up and down, could they be folded in a way sort of more like a fan would naturally fold a book, the pages in a book? It might be something interesting to look at. But again, I'm just not convinced that that's 7 feet, but somehow maybe the perspective is just wrong to me. So, because I was worried when I saw this image that, it would be low enough that it actually tempts people to try to get in it.
That was one of my main concerns. So I have asked over and over again, because I know deer can leap 6 feet.
Oh.
So I wanted to make sure it was above that. But we'll find out and we'll verify.
Yeah. I think the plaza entrance here, the conception and design of it is really beautiful and really solves a lot of the challenges of the building and being accessible. So I congratulate the design of that. Any other comments?
Rendering is the issue. See, this is much higher than that picture.
I see. Yeah. Commissioner Matthews is pointing to sort of
Technical drawings.
the drawing, which does look higher than the rendering does, and I agree with that.
That's probably what it is.
I sense no further comment or question, so is there a motion to approve the preliminary and final site and building plans?
So moved.
And second?
Second?
All in favor, please signify, pardon me.
Sorry, I thought that we were just going to move to get on to the EDR because I actually have an
Oh,
amendment that I'd like
pardon me.
to discuss and move to approve. So just going back to some of the backstory to this that I think was pretty well documented in the EDR, talking about some of the mistakes that were made with the historic fabric of the building being taken out. The DC Council actually held a hearing on this where SHPO came down and talked about some of the process and what happened here. Unfortunately, the district didn't send DCRA the first go around, but we recessed the hearing and reconvened it when we had DCRA to come down to talk about some of the issues that surrounded how it was that all the materials were taken out and that there was really no opportunity to stop it. So one of the concerns that came up is by the time that it was noticed that the interior element's been taken out, it took, depending on whose account you want to believe, it took over a week to actually get a stop work order issued, so work was actually continuing until the stop work order was issued. I think it was it's in the EDR, but I think that the stop work order was, August 31st. The EDR documents everything else that happened in there, but I wanted to recommend putting an additional note in there to kind of put the bookend in the very end of the story, which is when the stop work order was finally lifted. So the stop work order was finally lifted on December 27th, and according to DCRA, the testimony at the council, it was only allowed to proceed after it had gotten the 3 permits that it didn't get, which was the actual basis of the violation, and then paying the violation fees surrounding all of the the violation fees were really for not getting the permits. So the total permit or the total violations only amount to about $8,100 for all of the historical elements being taken out. But I mean, the way that the DCRA works, it's pretty much 50% of the cost of the permit is the fine that you get. So I just thought it was important, given the history of the mistakes of this project, to kind of put the back end on there and just document here that there was a fine issued, that the stop work order was lifted. So my amendment, which I think Ms. Coster just passed out, would just add a new 5th paragraph under the building renovation section on page 4 that would essentially just say that the stop work order was lifted eventually on December 27th. There were fines that were levied against the development project. So I just think that it kind of creates a little bit better record there.
Yes.
Could you, Commissioner, Evan, would you accept a friendly amendment to your amendment? I think the word missing implies that there were permits, but maybe somebody just didn't have them.
Yes. Do you have a better word to modify? I think that came directly from the chief building officer when he came out.
You know, you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, definitely. So it's not that we just didn't have them displayed and
Right.
so we got.
Something like we're satisfied after obtaining, you can just leave out missing.
Yeah. I think we
Just leave it out. They
leave out the
weren't
word
missing.
and I think that gets to the point.
They didn't have them.
Yeah, no, I think I'd accept that as a friendly amendment.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Argo and Commissioner Cash. Any discussion on this proposed amendment?
Should we have it read out loud? So
Sure.
if you're ready.
Thank you.
There it is. Oh, it's hidden. The proposed amendment would note the stop work order permit issues were satisfied after obtaining the building permits. DCRA allowed construction site activities to resume on December 27th, 2018. Notice of infraction fines associated with the cited violations totaled $8,136, naming Franklin School Development as the respondent.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments on the amendment? So I believe first we should vote on the amendment. Is that right?
Has it been moved and been moved?
Yeah. Pardon me?
I move the amendment.
Okay. So has it been seconded? All in favor of the amendment, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? None? Okay, then I think we did move and second already the EDR, but should I go back to that? Yes, with the amendment, sorry. Thank you. So I'll now ask if someone would move to adopt the EDR as amended.
So moved.
Moved and seconded? Second? Thank you. All in favor of the amended EDR, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? No. Thank you. Okay. The next item on the open agenda session is Agenda Item 6D, approval of final comments on the draft small cell infrastructure guidelines submitted by the District Department of Transportation. I'll note that the staff has been quite engaged with this initiative, and their collaboration has been impactful. Mr. Fliss will present this one.
Thank you. Today's presentation is a follow-up to the comments and recommendations from your December review of this project. You reviewed the draft guidelines at that time and provided comments to the District Department of Transportation for consideration in the updated small cell guidelines, including a map of proposed locations for small cell facilities for certain areas around the federal core. The guidelines have been recently updated and released for public comment. They do include references to the map, as well as have addressed much of the comments that NCPC has provided. My presentation today is to provide a brief update on that. So just as a refresher, due to growing demand, cellular companies are working to relieve the congestion on existing networks by deploying small cell infrastructure, which is a new lower power antenna equipment, to reduce traffic on roof-mounted equipment and large cell towers, which you're familiar with. This new technology requires significant infrastructure that can affect the aesthetics and function of public streets and spaces. And as you can see here, there are multiple applications for this infrastructure, including attaching to existing streetlights, utility poles, or employing new standalone pole installations. DDOT is the lead agency and liaison with cellular providers and is responsible for permitting small cell facilities within district rights-of-way. Further, DDOT has entered into a master license agreement with several companies that are planning to deploy this equipment throughout the district. The guidelines have been developed to inform the placement of these small cell facilities through specific criteria related to context, location, and aesthetics. The guidelines will be ultimately reviewed and adopted by the district's Public Space Committee, and I'll note that they will be taking comments through March 15th with a meeting on March 21st. I'd like to also reiterate that these guidelines do not apply to federal lands. This is looking at installations on district rights-of-way. And equipment on federal lands would be subject to review within the district, subject to NCPC review and approval, much as other telecommunications equipment is reviewed by this commission. So we've continued to work with DDOT to address and resolve comments and recommendations. I'm going to provide updates on 4 areas. First, the map. Secondly, our review process. Third is infrastructure design, and then a summary of some other important updates. So previously, the commission had advised that given the unique setting of the National Mall and the area around it, as well as the concentration of federal facilities, memorials, and monuments, a detailed map of preferred standalone pole locations could help reconcile coverage needs and impacts to the public realm, particularly because it was determined that additional coverage was appropriate. And although excluding new standalone poles within this area might protect resources, again, it wouldn't provide that coverage need over the long term. So we did prepare the map of facility locations, which the commission adopted in December, and we requested DDOT included in the guidelines, which they've done. I will say that there were some questions about the map and why nothing is shown on Pennsylvania Avenue, as well as the National Mall. Again, these areas are subject to federal review process, and so they're not subject to the guidelines. And so for clarity, we can certainly note that on the map so that it's clear to the carriers as well as the public that that's separate. In addition, the commission directed staff to coordinate with the National Park Service, the Smithsonian, and other interested landholders in evaluating coverage needs that include the National Mall, Constitution, and Independence Avenues over the next 6 months. I'll note that in the meantime, no facilities will be permitted on Constitution or Independence Avenues until a more comprehensive evaluation of coverage needs is developed. We've begun our outreach with those federal agencies to look at this area, and we'll be reporting back to the commission for your feedback over the next 6 months. Regarding the review process, consistent with the Commission's previous requests, the guidelines have been updated to reflect that any facility locations within the federal core map will not require additional NCPC review. However, if a carrier seeks an exception or a change from the guidelines, it will be referred to NCPC for comment and concurrence. Further, any proposal to move or alter security elements adjacent to federal lands will also require NCPC review and concurrence. And again, these changes are consistent with the Commission's previous recommendations. Regarding the infrastructure design, I know this was a topic of significant discussion in December. The guidelines have also been updated to indicate that no new standalone poles will be installed until new design standards have been developed. This aligns with the process that was described to you previously, in which the Commission, DDOT will work with NCPC, the Commission of Fine Arts, other district agencies, including the District Office of Planning, as well as the carriers over the next 6 months to develop a design or a standard for these new standalone poles. So in the meantime, small cell facilities would be limited to attachments on existing poles. The Commission had previously expressed support for this process and found that the development of a unified standalone pole design would be beneficial to the District of Columbia and also an example to other cities. I'll also note that there was a discussion about ground level cabinetry. Similar to the standalone poles, no new ground level cabinetry will be allowed until design standards for that component are also developed and adopted. And I will say that during this process, we'll be coming back to the Commission for your comments, of course. And ultimately, the designs would go back to the Public Space Committee in about 6 months for incorporation into the final guidelines. Staff has provided additional comments to DDOT for inclusion in the guidelines, consistent with some of your previous comments. Many of these have been incorporated. For example, they have clarified that facilities are not permitted adjacent to federal reservations, which are under the jurisdiction of the U.S. government, outside of the federal core. New guidelines regarding the placement of facilities in relationships to buildings, building architecture, and open spaces have also been added. This was actually a pretty substantial inclusion based upon our discussions with them. And there are also other clarifying guidelines regarding the placement of poles and other components of the streetscape, including trees. You had also suggested encouraging hoteling as a way to reduce the number of facilities. And again, this is co-locating facilities to really minimize the number of new elements in the streetscape. I will note that perhaps the biggest change in the updated guidelines is a 50% reduction in the number of facilities for block faces throughout the district. This reduction is consistent with the analysis and recommendations that we developed for the federal core, but it's been applied throughout the city. So while hoteling is not explicitly required, this reduction may help promote hoteling or co-location. So in terms of next steps, I mentioned this. DDOT anticipates the Public Space Committee will review the draft guidelines later this month. After they've been approved, they will go into effect. But again, the standalone poles will not be a part of that until the designs are developed. As I also mentioned, during the next 6 months, we'll be working with our federal partners, including the Park Service, to look at the National Mall area as well as the areas around it, to understand the needs for that particular area. And of course, we'll be working with DDOT, the Commission of Fine Arts, and our district partners regarding the infrastructure design, and we'll again be coming back to the Commission for those components. So in general, a majority of the comments that we have provided to DDOT have been incorporated into the latest draft. We will continue to work with DDOT to address any other details regarding consistency and clarity. And of course, other revisions may occur prior to the Public Space Committee taking their final action. And as such, we do suggest the Commission thank the District Department of Transportation for working with staff and incorporating some of these comments, and particularly given this is a complex effort. So I've gone through the recommendations in the report. I'm not going to repeat them, but I want to thank you, and I'm available for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Fliss. We do have 4 speakers, but any questions for Mr. Fliss before that? Okay. So first, we have Ms. Carly Didden from Crown Castle. Ms. Didden, you have 3 minutes to provide your testimony.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Carly Didden. I'm the Government Affairs Manager with Crown Castle. We have spoken with you in the past. We are a hoteler, publicly traded, shared communications infrastructure provider. And what this means is that we build out hotel-style small cells, individual carrier small cells, fiber optic cables, and towers. Our customers are the wireless carriers, as well as other businesses that we provide service to directly with our fiber optic cables. We appreciate this opportunity to comment, and we look forward to continuing working with the commission and the staff on further revisions to the guidelines and what we're going forward as our equipment evolves. As you know, we hired Skidmore, Owings Merrill to assist us in our designs, and we look forward to sharing those designs with the commission. We support the federal core interest area map. It does help provide us with definitive locations for where our facilities can go. We ask for greater flexibility to allow small cell installations adjacent to National Park Service reservations. There are many of these throughout the city, and at times it's unclear what corner we may use because there are multiple restrictions. We look forward to continuing these discussions, and we thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Didden.
Chairman?
Yes, question.
I want to just comment that Crown Castle was good enough to come out into the Eastern River community to present this issue, and I want to commend them for that. I don't think we've heard from any of the other vendors that kind of make us better aware in the community. I know our focus tends to be more downtown, but I appreciate that outreach very much. Thank you.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Any other questions for Ms. Didden this time? Next is Owen Stromer. Mr. Stromer, you have 3 minutes to provide your testimony.
Good afternoon. My name is Owen Stromer, and I represent Verizon Wireless. I would like to thank NCPC Commission and staff, along with all the other stakeholders, for the time and effort that has been required to develop the current guidelines. The small cell guidelines, which include the Commission's recommendations, will allow Verizon Wireless to begin deploying small cell technology in the DC right-of-way in 2019. We look forward to collaborating with the NCPC staff, DDOT, and other stakeholders over the next 6 months to develop a design for standalone poles and equipment-based cabinets that meet the performance needs of the wireless industry and the aesthetic requirements of the city. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Questions, comments?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
I would like to confirm that you guys aren't interested in hoteling, right?
That is correct.
Could you share, maybe we asked this before, is there a reason for that?
Sure. We have specific technology requirements that just don't lend itself to co-locating on the same structure as another carrier.
Okay. But this technology, is it a work in progress or is it a standard? I mean, there's no possibility of it being developed to accommodate.
That's a good question.
The number of poles we have.
So what I'm...
Most technology is always a work in progress.
They are always a work in progress. Right now, our technology does not lend itself to co-locating with other carriers or on other providers' poles. I can't say that in the future that it would not, because you're right, everything is in progress.
Thank you, Mr. Stromer. Next, we have Mr. Brian Stover with also Verizon Wireless, I believe. Mr. Stover, you have 3 minutes to provide your testimony.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate you hearing me today. And I'll be very brief since Mr. Stromer also represents Verizon, and thank the commission and staff for all the effort. It was a lot of, as you had mentioned earlier, a lot of collaboration between all the interested parties. So we just really are here to say that we support the initiative. We hope that you'll vote in favor of it. And we think it's a great first step at least. We know there's more work to be done on the standalone poles, but we think it's a great effort to move forward at this point in time. So thank you, and I'm here for any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Stover. Questions for Mr. Stover at this point?
Same one.
All right, and next and finally is Ms. Joanne Newhouse with the Penn Quarter neighborhood. Ms. Newhouse, you have, I don't know, 3 or 5 minutes to provide your testimony.
I have a copy. I'm short. Are they timing me?
Should be fine.
Okay. My name is Joanne Newhouse, and I'm the Executive Director of the Penn Quarter Neighborhood Association. NCPC has far greater leeway in the blocks within the Pennsylvania Avenue Plan area to restrict locations of poles than anywhere else in D.C. other than on federal land. I believe NCPC has not considered this when reviewing the guidelines, at least for that portion of downtown guided by the Pennsylvania Avenue Plan. As the guardians of the Pennsylvania Avenue Plan, NCPC, GSA, and the National Park Service have a responsibility to do nothing that does damage to the public spaces, including sidewalks of the L'Enfant Plan within that area. That some damage has already occurred under NCPC, GSA, and the National Park Service's oversight should not encourage you to continue along the same path today or in the future. All three agencies together violated already one sacred trust. That is that there be no curb cuts on Pennsylvania Avenue within the plan area. PADC denied curb cuts both to the developer of the Willard Hotel and to the Canadian Embassy. I won't go into that unless you want me to. However, instead of denying a curb cut to a new hotel in the old post office building, all three agencies pushed for the curb cut across the avenue sidewalk before the selected developer began to run for federal office. Please, let's reverse someone's poor judgment and prevent further damage to the Pennsylvania Avenue Plan area. Become the guardians you should be and not cave in to those who have selfish interests and don't care about the common good. Do not allow these poles within this historic area to occur if visible from a historic building or if blocking the view of a historic building. Every form of construction within the Pennsylvania Avenue Plan area should be reviewed to see if it improves or does damage to the area. That is NCPC's responsibility, and it needs to take that responsibility a lot more serious than it has in the past with this action here. There should be no poles erected within sight of any historic building in any of the historic districts in the original plan for the city south of the escarpment. You don't have the final say to that, but you do have the final say to demand that within the Pennsylvania Avenue Plan area. Both the legislation and the courts gave PADC the right to make a judgment as to whether an action support, PADC is the Pennsylvania Avenue Development Corporation, for which I work, by the way. The right to make a judgment as to whether an action supports or does damage to the Pennsylvania Avenue Plan area. That traveled with the plan as nothing other than which agency has that responsibility changed when the Congress transferred responsibilities from PADC to three federal agencies. At the very least, the rules for where a pole can be placed within the Pennsylvania Avenue Plan area must be more limiting than it can't be in front of a historic building, or even next to or across the street from a historic building. Each block is different, and if today you must approve changes to the guidelines, let them state that NCPC has final approval of where any poles may be located within the area of the Pennsylvania Avenue Plan. NCPC will develop guidelines where such poles may be located on a block-by-block basis, but no poles will be allowed in front of or near or across the street from a historic building or a building in which there are residential units. Ideally, this would be held for other portions of the original L'Enfant Plan area. Last, any restrictions mentioned above for the Pennsylvania Avenue Plan area with regard to residential units existing in the area should apply as well to locations where there are residential units in buildings outside of the Pennsylvania Avenue Plan area. The guidelines should be amended so that poles are not permitted in front of residential entrances or windows of residential units. Our sidewalks do not have sufficient depth to keep these poles from being right in front of residential buildings, and that should not be allowed. You too would understand my concern if you lived in one of these residential buildings and saw a black pole with something hanging on it instead of a beautiful building across the street. Where it can, NCPC needs to do more than limit the location of the poles to buildings that are not historic, and I hope you, the commissioners, will amend the staff recommendations to do just that for the area within the boundaries of the Pennsylvania Avenue Plan area. Further, I hope you will recommend that no poles should be placed by residential entrances or anywhere near residential windows facing the sidewalk.
Thank you, Ms. Newhouse. I guess I have a follow-up question for Mr. Fliss. So in the map,
Could I speak a minute,
Pardon
Ms.
me.
Newhouse?
Sir.
Ms. Newhouse, it's good to see you here.
Thank you.
You've been at this for a while. I think you and I worked
I've worked
together
on, I've
on the
worked on
Pennsylvania.
downtown. I've worked on downtown since 1970.
Yeah, I know, and you were on the Pennsylvania Avenue Development Corporation staff, were you?
I was.
That's right, we were together on
Yeah.
that. So I thank you for your comment. I have some thoughts about what you are concerned about. We'll get to it maybe as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dixon. Just a question regarding this testimony. I guess in the map, you mentioned that we're not addressing Pennsylvania Avenue at this time. And I thought it was because it's adjacent to NPS installations as well as, so can you clarify
Sure,
where we are
it's
here?
NPS jurisdiction. It's not DDOT, so it's not subject to the guidelines. So it's a separate discussion, separate but related, and we'll continue to have a dialogue on Park Service land as well.
Can I say, I just want to apologize. I did not realize a lot of the members of the commission had changed, but they might not know that there's an area, specifically defined area. I do have the Pennsylvania Avenue plan here that defines the area over which NCPC, the National Park Service, and GSA have specific roles in ensuring that the plan is maintained, even though there is no Pennsylvania Avenue Development Corporation anymore. That's over more years there isn't one than there was one. So it includes an area. It's not just Pennsylvania Avenue itself. I do know that there are no poles allowed, no devices allowed on Pennsylvania Avenue itself. But I was talking about the area called the Pennsylvania Avenue, the area over which the plan has jurisdiction and rules, actually.
And Mr. Fliss, can you clarify whether we have tried to incorporate those rules and guidelines into the map and guides that be incorporated in the guidelines?
Sure. I mean, we appreciate the comments. I mean, this is the challenge of trying to accommodate new technology while minimizing impacts. I mean, this idea of balance is the one that we've been discussing most as staff and working with DDOT. So we appreciate the comments and understand a lot of the concerns, and we recognize that this discussion is happening across the city. We have looked at the PADC. The map that we prepared included that area. Obviously, the PADC didn't contemplate 4G technology, but we walked every one of those streets to see what were the most appropriate locations and our best estimations so we could give DDOT some idea about what makes sense for those streets. So we think we've looked at this. I don't know if you recall back to our initial analysis when we had applied the guidelines to how many facilities could have been allowed on some of these streets. With our work, we've pulled back on some of those locations, and now the district has also pulled back in terms of the numbers. So I think those are two steps that we have taken.
And just to clarify further, there's a comment from Ms. Newhouse about focusing in on the fronts of residential entrances as a particular area of attention.
So there are two things the guidelines speak to. The facilities have to be at least 10 feet away from a building facade. The second thing is something that NCPC staff actually had incorporated into the guidelines, which was related to building entrances, because the previous version of the guidelines actually didn't really contemplate. It looked at the streetscape and kind of the rhythm of elements, but didn't contemplate what was happening on the building facades. So there is actually language in there now that talks about avoiding those entrances, because if you remember those renderings that we put together, you could have ended up with poles in some building entrances because there's space to put it. The guidelines now have been revised to address that issue. It's actually not residential specific, it's any kind of important building entrance. So it thinks about that.
Yes.
I don't know whether or not there's always a balance between making sure that the technology is functional and also visually acceptable. You do not have the technology near the door entranceway, would that limit somebody who needs to use the technology at that entrance, or would you could spread it out so that would still function? As I'm assuming, is that correct?
So the way it works is, I mean, they're looking down corridors, right?
Yep.
So the functionality of what the carriers are looking at is to be able to fill those corridors with service, and so it's not so site specific that not having it built in front of the building entrance is not going to impact service, because there will be poles in a number of locations to cover that.
That's what I thought. Now, I heard that there were some possibilities of putting the technology on buildings, as we have other antennas. Is that too far away for them to work at street level?
We've heard that. I would defer to the carriers. I know that's a discussion that's happening in some areas, mostly where the buildings are shorter, 2 or 3 stories. When we're looking at the downtown area, we have much taller buildings, and so if the rooftops are not going to be able to get you service down at street level, but I would defer to the carriers on that question.
Yeah, I'm not sure that makes us any happier to have them on top of the buildings, but at least it wouldn't be on the streets. But so you defer to the carriers, maybe.
Yeah,
I'd like to know more about that possibility.
I don't know if they can speak to that or not.
Mr. Stover or Mr. Stromer, either of you? Please, come on up.
So specifically the question. I'll put one down and one up. So specifically the question then was about putting the antennas on the rooftops?
Yeah.
So the small cell technology is a new evolution in wireless infrastructure. So really, you're still going to need those antennas on the rooftops as well as the antennas lower to the ground, the small cells. So they'll work in conjunction with one another. The small cells aren't necessarily needed just for 5G, the future evolution. They're needed for the current 3, 4G technology today. So they're absolutely needed for the 5G technology, but they're needed for both.
So the answer to the question is that you need them at street level, more or less. You could not function off of this technology if they were all on
Correct.
rooftops, even not high rooftops, but maybe more acceptable rooftops.
Correct.
I see. It's evolving technology. I like the way you emphasize that.
It is evolving. And if you don't mind, if I can answer your other question about the co-location or the hoteling. So with the new technology, with this 5G specifically, part of the 5G initiative is speed, that is quicker, faster. So in order to get faster, you have to reduce the latency. And one way that they've done that, the engineers, they've combined the antennas and the radio equipment into one unit. So you used to have radio equipment somewhere on the ground or somewhere on the pole, and the antennas up high. So you had your equipment and you have your antennas, and they would work in conjunction. Well, with the 5G, you've combined those 2 units into one. So the radios are actually at the top where the antennas are, and it's one piece of equipment. So in the older technology, you actually had separate radio equipment on the ground, but you could sometimes share that same antenna. Well, sharing that antenna is no longer technically feasible. So each carrier, Verizon has its own antenna and equipment, AT&T would have their own antenna and equipment, Sprint and so forth. So, while you might be able to stack all those, it's going to get really large because you have to have separation between the antennas and so forth. So, could you do it? You possibly could do it. Would it be practical? It would not be very practical. Does that help you?
It does, but I think my clarity I have now is that the technology, the boxes, that could be hotel, but the antennas need to have their separate presence for each of the carriers.
Well, as technology evolves, so we've evolved throughout the years, right? We've had 1G, 2G, 3G, 4G. I mean, 5G is just another evolution that will eventually go, like right now, the networks are more or less 3G, 4G networks. And soon they're going to be 4G, 5G networks. And eventually, it'll be a 5G network. There will be no more 4G. Everything, the rooftops, the macro sites, the small cells, it'll all be 5G eventually. But we have to get there, right? So it's an evolution that your phones, Christmas time's a great time that everybody upgrades their phones and so forth. So all the new phones, more than likely this Christmas will have 5G technology built in, and unbeknownst to everyday users, they'll be upgrading their phones at that time and be able to take advantage of the new infrastructure and the new technology. And as more and more people do that over time, then you'll see the shift or the evolution from the 3G, 4G network to the 4G, 5G network. And so as we do that, though, some of those small cells today will have both the 4G and the 5G technology. So for Verizon, for example, we'll have a 5G antenna RAD center, location, but we'll also need a 4G antenna RAD center. And the other carriers are going to have the same experience. So there's going to be a transition, and again, so Verizon may require 2 RAD centers, AT&T 2 RAD centers, Sprint 2 RAD centers, and you can't necessarily hotel all that equipment in a small light pole like you used to be able to do on a monopole that's 180 feet tall.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I love my old BlackBerry.
Commissioner Cash.
BlackBerry's
Just
coming
went
back.
dead on me. I have a new one.
I have a question for Ms. Didden, and I want to also thank her for coming and briefing a lot of the council staff. I think that her presentation was very helpful in understanding the technology better. So you mentioned that you have that T-Mobile and Sprint are hoteling with you.
Yes.
Is that just because they are expected to merge and will have the same technology, or are there truly 2 carriers that will be hoteling on Crown Castle's system?
So we signed contracts with T-Mobile and Sprint before they announced their merger.
So
we are building out facilities for both carriers in the same hotel, and that's going forward regardless of the merger.
Well, speaking of Game of Thrones, is there some kind of magical power that Crown Castle has figured out to be able to do what the other 2 carriers have said is completely impossible?
So what we have done as a company is we've worked with equipment manufacturers. So we have we need a cabinet of some sort, be it ground level on the pole or somewhere else, where we put all the radio equipment. And then we have a special antenna that we designed with various manufacturers. And it looks like one big canister antenna, but inside it actually has up to 24 ports in it. So each one of those ports is a separate antenna. And that means that the carriers can share one large looking canister antenna that has individual ports for them.
Are either Verizon or Verizon or AT&T in any Crown Castle installations in any other areas of the U.S. right now?
Yes, so we actually have 4 carrier co-located facilities, over 700 of them in Baltimore and throughout the United States.
Well, thank you for that, and I'd just like to again urge AT&T and Verizon. I think that would make everyone's lives so much easier with a lot of the discussion we've had here, where I think that what it's looking like, especially now in the federal core interest area where we've severely downsized the number of poles there's going to be, I'm guessing it's going to be a mad dash to the permitting process, and there are going to be holes everywhere or poles everywhere if in service or in the coverage. And I see that it's a big problem. And I understand probably from a business perspective why certain companies want to do it. They want to be the first one on the block when we're getting all this great new technology. They want to have the greatest coverage. But I think that it's really doing a disservice to the district to have to just allow 3 times the polls, or if another company starts up tomorrow, who knows how many we'd be left with. So thank you for those answers. And Mr. Fliss, I just had a question about your understanding of the new guidelines where it talks about adjacent to federal property or federal reservations. Is that any federal reservation throughout the district? So we can't put these around DuPont Circle, RFK?
That would be immediately, yes, adjacent to a federal reservation, which is the numbered reservations that NPS administered.
So now with something like the circles and square parks that we have, I mean, it'd be clear that you couldn't put it on the sidewalk on the square itself, but say across the street from that, so across from Franklin Park. So that's still adjacent. They can't be.
Well, no, that would be across the street.
So there are still some limitations.
I think the recognition, especially outside the federal core, is that you've got parks and open spaces that are in a context where there may be other locations for installation. So that's my understanding.
So I mean, the thing about federal reservations might not actually be that groundbreaking, because right now we wouldn't expect to see any kinds of this equipment in the federal spaces anyway. It's not district right of way anyway. Well, is that true? Are the rights of way around these parks, like Franklin Park, is that maintained by Park Service or DDOT?
It's not consistent across all the reservations. Some of them, the line of the reservation is drawn at the back of the curb, and in some cases, it's drawn at the back of the sidewalk. So we only have, the sidewalk becomes part of the DDOT street right-of-way. And there are all sorts of other complicated rules. I mean, there are DDOT streets that cross the mall, but we control the sidewalks there, even though they're in the right-of-way. I mean, it's almost like every single one has to be looked at individually and looked at. But I mean, I think generally speaking, what we're saying here is that when it's a Park Service reservation, so it's, as I understand it, it's not the reservations that have been transferred to DC jurisdiction, right? But when it's a Park Service reservation, that it wouldn't even go in the DDOT right-of-way that surrounds it. Now, across the street, it's a different story.
So I'll just end on this. I've been very critical of the speed with which the district is moving forward on this. It feels like a real race that we're undertaking for, while there's still a lot of uncertainty about this, there's a lot of ongoing litigation throughout the country by a lot of municipalities. I think that we could take a more expansive view of kind of our sovereignty here in the district and maybe push back a little bit instead of kind of just trying to be the first to get all this technology here. So with my commissioner hat on, I want to really thank DDOT for incorporating the suggestions that the commission has made with respect to the federal interest. With my DC council hat on, I would just reiterate that there was a hearing held right after the last time we considered this, and there were about 50 people that signed up, almost all of them overwhelmingly, wanting us to pump the brakes or slow down or have the Public Space Committee make some more changes. So kind of from my district perspective, I really wish that DDOT would use some of these newfound powers to circumvent the supposed preemptions that we had, because we've apparently been able to come out with a lot of exceptions for these federal core interest areas in our new local rules. And I wish we would kind of take the same view of preemption when it comes to looking at the rest of the city. So, but I do want to thank the staff for working to at least make some progress here in the federal interest areas.
Thank you. Am I dismissed?
Yes.
Please have a seat. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I want to join in with his comments. I guess we both wear two hats. I don't forget that. But it just seems to me that we got everybody. People are talking, but we got some folks that don't seem to want to move. To hear that the hoteling is taking place in other jurisdictions with Verizon and others, and now we can't seem to get that movement here. I'm not sure I like that situation. And particularly, how sensitive our downtown is, how we want to make sure that Pennsylvania Avenue is not clustered with poles. I mean, we got movements across the country for different reasons, maybe to go underground with power lines and to eliminate poles. And now we're involved in generating another set of poles. I mean, they don't have wires running between them, which is really unsightly, but it's still a pole. So it just seems to me that we got to keep this down. We don't want to look back a few years from now and say, oh, technology's moved forward. We don't need these poles anymore, and we got to find out how we get them down. Also, I know that there is a requirement that if these poles are removed or if there's no need for them, that the carriers are responsible for taking them down. Come out into my neighborhood and you see the wires hanging. It's unbelievable. It looks like when I was in Nepal. I mean, where you got wires, you just stop them and just drop them on the street. We got wires just dangling all up and down the street on Shannon Place and the other areas, the southeast. And there's no maintenance. Nobody's taking care of those things. They're just hanging. And I hope they're safe, but they just look terrible. So I'm assuming they will do that if they had to go away. But there's a lot before us now. So thank the staff. They did a great job bringing it to us. I wish we could find some more cooperation and maybe something I don't understand to get this together and not have all these poles that we may or may not need in the future. Thank you.
Yep.
So,
Mr. May.
Thank you. I just want to say I agree with a lot of the things that have been said today and the concern about trying to hotel as much equipment as possible. I can appreciate some of the differences in technology the way they are right now, but I think one of the most important things we heard today is about how fast moving the technology is and how much things are changing. Just to sort of emphasize that, I'm sure there are a handful of people in this room, maybe most of the people in the room, who are on the Joe Gibbons nightly email on 5G technology. The Verizon guys all get it. But, we're constantly getting these updates from Joe Gibbons, who's an ANC commissioner in Georgetown, who's been dogging this issue for a long time and is researching everything and following what's happening in the FCC. And, last night it was a statement from the CEO of Verizon, Lowell McAdam, talking about the improvements in technology or the tests that have been done that have demonstrated that absolute line of sight is not critical for 5G technology, which early on was something that people were saying was necessary. And so now this may not have been a real change in what Verizon was saying. It's just that it was said in a more public way. It is very hard for the public and for us, I think, as commissioners, to really stay on top of this. And I appreciate everything that the staff has done to press and not necessarily accept what they've been told, but to challenge some of the assumptions that have been made and to try to make progress. I'm hopeful that DDOT is being similarly diligent in the development of and ultimate implementation of the guidelines. But I'll say I don't always have 100% confidence in DDOT to follow through on these things. So I think it's very important that the commission staff continue to press on these topics as we move forward. I do believe a substantial amount of progress has been made since we started talking about this frantically in the summer. And so I feel a lot better about what I see today being presented than I did back then. So I think this is progress, but we have to be vigilant, and this will continue to evolve. And hopefully by the time a lot of this stuff gets rolled out, the technology will be so small and easy to deploy that we won't really even notice it. So anyway, we can hope, right? Anyway, thank you very much.
Comments? Commissioner Steingasser.
I'm just wondering, based on what I'm hearing from the commission, if it's worth adding another note to the EDR that says it's the desire of this commission that hoteling be pursued as the first option for location. And then that gets passed on to DDOT and we can work from there.
Is that technically feasible? I mean, it'd be one thing to propose that something be done, but if it's not technically feasible, I don't know if that makes a lot of sense.
Are able to do it. So my suggestion would be that the commission notes that it's our preferred position that carriers hotel whenever possible.
So then are we expressing a preference for a particular carrier?
No, I think we're
Who can only
expressing
has
a
the technology to
preference
do it?
for hoteling whenever possible. And if a carrier can't, then they can't. I think this is just passing comments on that that's our preference, that there be hoteling to minimize the impact in the spaces.
Commissioner Matthews, I think what we heard is a little bit conflicting input from the industry, if you will, as I heard it. We have one vendor whose business model is built around hoteling of all 4 vendors in other cities. So I guess the question would be, maybe this is the one you're trying to understand also, is what makes Washington unique that it wouldn't allow that technology to be feasible as opposed to it actually being feasible in other cities. There's a conflict in the testimony. Maybe we could call up both Verizon experts as well as Crown Castle to clarify. You want to start, Ms. Didden? Thank you.
So hoteling is possible. It depends on the combination of radio equipment and frequencies that are being deployed by the carriers. So what's happening in the district versus what's happening in other cities may be different. And that may be why some carriers are choosing not to hotel. But it's not always a technological limitation as it is a business decision.
Mr. Stover, do you have anything to add?
I do. Thank you. I would suggest that, Ms. Didden is correct, that Verizon does hotel with Crown Castle in Ocean City, Maryland, in Baltimore City, and we've done it throughout the country in various stages. That was 4G technology where we could share antennas and so forth. But as explained earlier, our current future, technology is 5G with an integrated antenna and radios all in one unit. The model that Ms. Didden described doesn't support 5G. So in Ocean City, Maryland, for Verizon to roll out 5G technology, we are going to have to either try to add equipment to their site, which is going to make it much larger, or we're going to have to put up our own installations in Ocean City, Maryland. In Baltimore City, we're seeking to put up our own installations because we need our own, RAD centers, what they call, where your antennas are located. So I would suggest it's a little misnomer to say that because we've hoteled in the past, that we can hotel in the future. It's older technology in the past. New technology in the future doesn't permit it. So, to Mr. May's point is, it's hard for the public to understand what's going on because you have somebody saying one thing and somebody else saying another. And if you're not in the industry, those slight nuances to say that Verizon has hoteled in the past sort of indicates that we could hotel in the future, which is not true because it's a different technology. So, that would be my point. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Didden, you have anything you'd like to say to clarify?
At this point, we are co-locating, hoteling 5G equipment for various companies. And what we do is we add that equipment below the light arm. So we'll have a canister antenna on top. We'll have the 5G equipment below the light arm or inside the pole, depending on the technology, the infrastructure that's been deployed. And then you don't, because the antenna and the radio equipment for 5G is one unit, we don't have to add anything to our cabinet.
Mr. Chairman, I want to be clear that nobody here, I think, wants to push this opportunity to one carrier. It seems to me that the benefit that comes to the community and the business model that works for these telecommunication companies is when they get customers who like the service they get. Not that they got control of all the poles in the block and nobody else can get in. It seems to me we need to offer all those to our constituents and our community. And the technology needs to find a way to accommodate that, and I think it can be done. I believe it can be done. I mean, you're telling me that new technology is less flexible than the old technology was. So I think that there's got to be an effort to do something, and maybe we're not talking to the technicians, but technicians would probably say, well, we can find a way to solve that problem, maybe.
If I may address one of your other concerns, there are a number of companies that have signed the master license agreement with the district, and Crown Castle is not the only hoteler that has signed that agreement. There are other companies, so we would not be the sole company to benefit from something like hoteling.
I have one other question just to clarify also. When we were told earlier that 50% reduction in the number of poles, was that based on the assumption that there would be a substantial amount of hoteling occurring, or help us understand that movement?
I mean, I can't speak for DDOT, but that is more of a locational analysis, just how many facilities are on blocks. I don't think there was any regard to whether it was hoteled or not. I think it's a potential benefit that there are fewer facilities. That's something that staff had always talked about. I mean, that's an incentive to work together and co-locate if possible. But
Commissioner Cash?
Just to follow up with Baltimore and Ocean City, which were mentioned, do either of those jurisdictions have requirements in place that pushed them to hoteling? And have they tried to regulate in this area?
I don't believe so.
Yeah, Baltimore City and Ocean City do not have a requirement to hotel.
But do they have guidelines such as what we're looking at approving or making comments on here in the district?
So different municipalities handle the aesthetic guidance differently. So they may not have the same kind of published detailed guidelines that are here in the district, but there are various requirements and permitting and zoning that we have to go through in order to comply.
And actually, as long as you're up here too, I mentioned earlier kind of the race to get to the polls. What happened? I mean, do you have any sense of how DDOT is indicating they're going to issue the permits? Is it going to be to make sure that the configurations with individual companies work well, where the poles are close enough to each other to provide coverage? Is it really a first come, first serve? I mean, if there are, especially down here in the core, if there's going to be restrictions on how many poles can go in, how are companies assured that there will be enough coverage for them?
We're not assured that we're going to get any certain number of poles in any particular location. The guidelines do include a limit as to how many poles that we can have our facilities on per block. And it's truly going to be a race to the polls. We're going to file for where we want to get our facilities in. And if we're first, then we'll get it. And if we're not, then we may have to wait for another opportunity.
So by not hoteling, we're actually upping the chance that we're going to have gaps in coverage depending on which carrier you're on, because it could be that Crown Castle gets all of the poles on one block and we have our T-Mobile coverage there, but AT&T and Verizon won't function as well in certain places, or vice versa.
So at Crown Castle, under our business model, we would be happy to have them on our facilities. But you raise a good point, yes.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Stover, did you have any last comment on that question?
I would just say to that question that I think the carriers are limited in terms of how close our facilities could be. So DDOT has taken that into consideration, that one carrier couldn't take a monopoly of a whole area, that there would be enough room for competition. And I would also say that, DC has 71,000 light poles today that we're looking, as an industry, we've commented to DDOT in the Public Space Committee hearings that we're, talking about using less than 10% of those. So in the monumental core, that's a different story. There's limited resources. There's National Park Service to contend with and things. And so we're anxious to work with NCPC and National Park Service and all the other stakeholders on solving that issue there, which is a unique set of circumstances. But we don't, we don't see that necessarily being a barrier to providing service throughout the city. Thank you.
So I believe there was a proposed amendment to the ER to add a note. And Ms. Coster, could you read that, please?
With the concurrence of Commissioner Steingasser, notes that the commission encourages hoteling as the preferred option when possible.
That kind of wraps it, what I was trying to get at. It's not a requirement. I'm not suggesting it be a requirement, just simply that it be noted as the sense of this commission.
And is that being directed at DDOT, just to clarify, or the vendors? So we add that?
But you would be going on the record. We will transmit this to DDOT and the Public Space Committee, so they would get a copy.
Okay, so that amendment has been seconded. Now for discussion. Mr. Matthews.
So, I'm not sure if I have clarity on this question. I thought what I was hearing was there are some carriers that could not go into that type of a facility, and then would we essentially be expressing a preference through this for one carrier over another? And that's what makes me uncomfortable. I don't know if we should be doing that, but I thought that's what I heard from Verizon.
I thought I heard that there were enough spots on each block to make sure that there would be enough space for vendors on a street. Mr. Stover, just maybe you could clarify.
Yes, so if I understand the question correctly, it was that, would hoteling encourage one type of installation over another and one carrier over another? And I believe that would be accurate, that, Verizon's testified that we cannot hotel, and Crown has suggested that they could hotel. And, And I still think there's nuances there, and I'd rather not get into a public debate about it, but, we would be against a requirement for hoteling. And as I stated before, Verizon, it's the same type of installation. The canister antenna at the top, we put our 5G antennas below that. There's not room for, we couldn't support, in our installation, we could not support AT&T, Sprint, or T-Mobile on our pole. So I'm not sure how Crown could say that they could support Verizon and AT&T and Sprint and T-Mobile when I physically can't do it myself. I just don't understand that.
That's a technical issue.
Well, it's both a technical issue and a size constraint. So a traditional monopole, it's been the experience of the carriers that we would co-locate whenever possible. I mean, that's kind of been the lay of the land across the country. But you have a 180-foot tall monopole, you put one carrier, 10 feet below, you put another carrier, and so everybody's 150 feet and up. On a 28-foot tall light pole, you're limited on your real estate. You have to be so far above the ground, and so now you're talking about, you have 10 feet to work with, and you can't put 4 carriers all within that 10 feet.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Cash.
Yeah, so on the issue of whether we're pushing one carrier up over the other, first I'd note that Crown Castle, to my understanding, is not a carrier. They are a facilitator that the carriers would sign up with to provide them services, much in the same way that the carriers are coming to the district to provide them a service of giving them away a piece of the public space to use. But I'd also note that in the district, I believe that it's for both telephone and for a lot of the other cabling, including fiber optic, that there is a requirement for hoteling, that they have to share the same pipes through a lot of the at least the downtown area where it's undergrounded. And we still have Verizon Fios providing cable, we still have Comcast providing cable, and we still have RCN providing cable. So I don't think that hoteling or sharing of facilities in the past or encouraging that sharing has really borne out any preference of one provider over the other. They just simply were able to use the same public space and public facilities that we're now going to be handing over for the first time. I think actually we're going to be handing these over to private companies who will be operating profitable enterprises on essentially rented public space, and we don't see that with a lot of other things that we see in the public space, be it street lights or anything like that, at least here in the core. So I think that saying that encouraging hoteling or encouraging co-location where practical or where feasible, I don't think that necessarily puts one person up over another. We've done it with a number of other pieces of technology infrastructure. So I just like to put that on the record.
Any further discussion on the proposed amendment? Okay, that amendment has been seconded, so could you please reread it, Ms. Coster?
Of course. Notes that the commission encourages hoteling as the preferred approach where possible.
Okay, sensing no further discussion, please signify your agreement with that proposed amendment by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, let's go back to the original EDR. Are there any further comments or questions regarding the original EDR? Sensing no further comment?
So move.
Thank you. And seconded? Thank you. Please signify approval of the EDR as amended by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Very, very good discussion. We again appreciate the staff and the work that you're doing to collaborate and create consensus around a very challenging and technical topic. Very important to the aesthetic of our city. That covers all of our action items, and now we'll have an information presentation on the master plan for the Department of Homeland Security headquarters consolidation. I believe Ms. Sullivan is going to make that presentation.
All right, good afternoon, members of the commission. The General Services Administration is here to provide an information presentation on a proposed master plan amendment for the Department of Homeland Security headquarters consolidation at the St. Elizabeth's West Campus. The St. Elizabeth's West Campus is located at 2700 Martin Luther King Jr. Avenue in southeast Washington, D.C. It is situated in the Congress Heights community in Ward 8 and overlooks Interstate 295, Bowling Air Force Base and the Anacostia River. The site is 176 acres. The Commission reviewed the final master plan to consolidate the Department of Homeland Security headquarters on this campus 10 years ago. Since then, the Commission has seen 2 master plan amendments, one in 2010 to amend the area of the plan for the U.S. Coast Guard headquarters, and one in 2012 to relocate FEMA to the East Campus and make some additional transportation improvements. GSA is now planning to submit a 3rd master plan amendment to the Commission this fall. The proposed amendment is needed to address budget constraints and new programming requirements for DHS. So just a little bit of background about the campus. The history of St. Elizabeth's Hospital began in 1852 when Dorothea Dix, the advocate of modern treatment of the mentally ill, persuaded Congress to appropriate $100,000 to build a model hospital for the treatment of the mentally ill in Washington, D.C. The hospital, which was operated by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services from the time of construction in 1852, was in existence until the early 1990s, at which time the hospital closed and patients were moved across the avenue to the hospital on the East Campus. In 1991, the Secretary of the Interior designated St. Elizabeth's a National Historic Landmark for the national significance of the site and its association with 20th century social and humanitarian movements. Within the St. Elizabeth's West Campus, there are 62 buildings that have been identified as contributing to the historic character of the National Historic Landmark. GSA took custody of the campus in 2004 after Health and Human Services declared the property as excess, and shortly thereafter it was decided that the campus would meet the Department of Homeland Security's need for a secure federal campus as it consolidated 22 separate agencies into one location. The 2009 master plan for St. Elizabeth's established a framework for 4.5 million gross square feet of office support space between existing and new development to house DHS. It also included an additional 1.5 million gross square feet of parking. The buildings in brown represent existing development, the majority of which are contributing to the national landmark. The buildings in yellow represent new development. There was a lot of discussion among the consulting parties about placement and massing of this new development at the time. Following the master plan approval, NCPC approved an amendment to expand the footprint of the now-built U.S. Coast Guard headquarters buildings and to reduce the height of the West Ravine parking garage. And then in 2012, the Commission approved another master plan amendment to relocate the FEMA headquarters to the East Campus across Martin Luther King Jr. Avenue and to construct a new access road and interchange on Shepherd Parkway and NPS property for an improved connection to I-295. The FEMA headquarters did not ultimately move to the East Campus, which I believe will be addressed in the information presentation today. There were several key considerations that informed the Commission's review in 2009. These will continue to inform future reviews. Examples include preserving the features of this National Historic Landmark and its contributing buildings on the campus, maintaining the open space and plateau around which the campus was designed, maintaining the campus's panoramic views of the Anacostia and Potomac rivers and of Washington, D.C., and protecting the views of the topographic bowl. St. Elizabeth's campus is located on the Anacostia Hills, one of the 3 hillsides that comprise Washington's topographic bowl. It is visible from prominent locations around the city. Over the last several months, GSA has engaged the consulting parties, including NCPC staff, in initial discussions to amend the master plan. I would like to now introduce Christy Tunstall-Williams, Director of GSA's Historic Preservation and the Arts Division, and Otto Condon, Principal with ZGF, to talk more about the drivers behind the new master plan amendment, where they are at in the planning process, and the schedule for future review.
Thank you all for your time. And on behalf of GSA and DHS, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank you, Diane, for the helpful background on the presentation, on the master plan. There we go. So I'm going to talk specifically about the master plan refresher. Diane has already covered a lot of the 2008, what was included in the original master plan, but I'd like to talk about our progress to date in implementing that, and then the lessons learned in the last 10 years as we've implemented the project. And then I'll turn it over to Otto Condon from ZGF Architects, who's our AE on the master planning effort, to walk you through the design development of the master plan amendment, as well as our preferred sort of option at this moment. The NEPA and 106 are still ongoing and will continue to go through the next year or so, and Otto will talk about the schedule for that as well. So looking at the numbers, as Diane already covered, originally the master plan envisioned 4.5 million square feet spread across 2 campuses. My comments to date, all the development has happened solely on the West Campus. So all the numbers that I'm addressing right now will talk just to the West Campus development. As Diane alluded to, and as Otto will cover more specifically as he discusses the master plan amendment, the East Campus is no longer envisioned to be part of this total DHS campus. That is a city-owned parcel and is now, I believe, the location for the proposed hospital. So it's no longer available to us. So as Diane pointed out, the campus is a combination of existing historic buildings as well as proposed new construction. Initially on the West Campus, there was 3.8 million square feet of development approved. Included in that was approximately 900,000 square feet of adaptive reuse. To date, adaptive reuse and new construction, we've completed just over 2 million square feet of development. That's about 54% of the total square footage. Included in that is about 380,000 square feet of adaptive reuse. In terms of parking, we've completed just over 65% of the parking on campus. We were approved at 1.2 million square feet in the original master plan and have constructed just about 800,000 square feet to include close to 2,000 parking spaces. The new construction includes the Monroe Building on the western portion of the campus here. It's showing up at the bottom of the screen. Most of the adaptive reuse has to do with the Historic Center building, which is just about to come online. The DHS secretary should be occupying beginning April 1st. And then there's a number of other ancillary, smaller historic buildings that have been rehabilitated to support campus use. The other new construction numbers also include gatehouses and screening facilities to support the campus.
Can you point out that building you just referred to, the administration?
Yes, let me see if I can find the pointer.
No.
Here we go.
It
It's
won't.
this
It does work.
large building.
Pointer.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Sorry. It's the large, long zigzag building, almost in the center of the plan.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And then the Coast Guard is at the bottom, which is showing kind of in yellow and green. For lessons learned, as we've had 10 years go by, we've built out 2 million square foot on the campus. We've learned a number of things. One of them, sort of most saliently as it relates to the adaptive reuse and the preservation of the NHL, is the condition of the existing buildings. Many of them were vacant long before GSA took over, in some instances for several decades. When we took over the campus, we did mothball. However, through time and disuse, the conditions have deteriorated. In addition, we've done forensic analysis on almost all of these buildings, and we've identified not only prolonged deterioration from vacancy, but also original construction deficiencies. And that will influence all of these lessons learned you'll see are reflected in our proposed master plan amendment. We are changing some of the commitments in terms of adaptive reuse. We're increasing the size and sort of form of some of the new construction to make them more efficient. The next big element is the inefficient floor plate. So the nature of these, early or mid-19th century and early 20th century buildings is they're typically small. They have narrow floor plates. A lot of the square footage is taken up by corridors or lobbies. When the campus was planned, we planned for an efficiency factor of 1.3. What we've achieved in most instances, not just in the historic buildings, but also in the new construction, is closer to 2.0. So that means for every 2 square feet that we had planned, or every 1 square foot that we had planned, 2. We've only gotten 1. So it's about a 50% efficiency rate. The modern buildings, part of the reason that they have proven to be less efficient than a typical modern building is some of the preservation constraints, particularly with the Coast Guard building, the way it has to step down the hillside to sort of lessen the impact on the topographic bowl as well as on the NHL campus. And you'll see that reflected in some of the moves that we've made in the proposed new construction on the plateau. There we go. The other big thing is the construction costs, both in terms of the adaptive reuse given their advanced deterioration. Costs on the adaptive reuse buildings have run in some instances nearly double what was planned. And then we also have a great amount of soil instability on the campus. So the Coast Guard building also had cost escalations as well as the upcoming plateau building sites to stabilize the slope to allow us to have a secure building site. And then we've also had cost escalations due to funding delays. And I'll talk a little bit more about that now. So since 2006, when GSA started this project, we have only been appropriated 43% of the funds that we have requested. That's problematic for a variety of reasons. One, dollars today are not the same as they were in 2008, so we can build a lot less. In addition, DHS has a tremendous program, and we've had to address that elsewhere. And so it's currently in leases and expiring leases and things, so we're under pressure to reduce our operating funds. So to date, while we have invested a tremendous amount in the campus, both in terms of construction but also infrastructure to support it, that be access roads, security, those types of things, we haven't really achieved a substantial consolidation of DHS on the site. So some of the things that we're proposing are in response to that. We need to show to our appropriators that, yes, we can achieve this and we can get a critical number of the agency on the campus. So what we'll see in what Otto is going to present, that we're shifting. In the previous master plan, we had talked a lot, it was very careful in the phasing and the balance of the new construction and the adaptive reuse. We're asking in this next go-round to proceed with, the next phase should have been adaptive reuse, to proceed with new construction. And that will allow us to build another large building and really get DHS a more prominent foothold on the campus to support the Secretary as well as to support their mission. Let's see. The other thing that you'll see, the floor plates that are shown for the new construction are much more efficient, which allows us to deliver them at a much lower cost per square foot than previously would have been possible. And let's see. And the last one is to build the authorizers. So this is both from OMB and from Congress. Their faith that we can deliver this project, that we can get a critical mass of DHS on the campus to allow them to fulfill their mission seamlessly. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Otto to walk you through the design development and the new design. Do you want any of these slides?
Thank you, Christy. Thank you, Diane, and good afternoon, commissioners. So to start off, as we were first charged for this master plan to focus on the plateau for new construction, as Christy had mentioned. And also, in terms of the scope of the study, was to really look at just the plateau and also the Office of Intelligence and Analysis, which I'll describe a little bit later. But in terms of to do it in a diligence with quantifiable metrics, understanding daylighting so that the workspace was of quality for the employees, that the slope stabilization, which was necessary, could be addressed through both cost effectively and through the use of the building, so that there wasn't being two strategies, and one for slope and one for the architecture, but really try to integrate those, and meet the targets for gross square foot and usable square feet. So starting last summer, excuse me, those 5 circles, I can't use this right, the 5 circles on the upper left, we really worked with the consulting parties to help be part of the design team to develop what would be an appropriate and acceptable approach for new construction on the plateau. By mid-December, we came up with a general consensus on what the direction for the concept could be for the new construction. And so we're now here at that dark blue circle as a briefing. So I will provide a very high-level overview of where we've been, because we will be coming back in the fall to present the draft master plan and then the final master plan, which is targeted for July of 2020. And there's also, because of some of the level of construction and level of some of the removal of the buildings, what was anticipated to be an environmental assessment, supplemental environmental assessment, it's now going to be an environmental impact statement. So that is part of the process. Again, these are the two areas we were looking at. Really, our focus was up in the upper right, the dashed red circle, the area adjacent to it's the plateau adjacent to the South Lawn. And then, as part of another programmatic question, was the INA site, which is down by the Coast Guard and the center building. So for the plateau site, we really wanted to look at this in three buckets so we could identify if we were achieving the goals for the master plan. The first was campus context. The new development, which was, we're looking at 1.2 million square feet of new construction, was of the appropriate scale because that was really a critical component of the 2008 master plan. As Diane mentioned, the views, both within the campus and from outside the campus, were critical. So how that massing was going to fit in the campus was something that we were working through with consulting parties. And I will say it was a really fun process as designers because we were able to use 3D modeling, physical models, photomontages to really let everybody see what the potential impacts might be. Landscape, it's a beautiful campus and it's critical to maintain and ensure that the landscape really does tie the campus together. And habitat, as there are a lot of areas where there's some unique habitat like the adjacent Eagle Zone. Again, we were charged with looking at the quality and operations for the federal government. It was also in the process that they were looking at both the workplace efficiency, reducing the usable square feet per seat, making identity for all the departments within Homeland Security had some identity within the campus, and then ensuring that the performance space that the workers had daylight, but it wasn't detrimental to their work environment. And then finally, just feasibility, making sure that the master plan, as we were working through these concepts, the master plan amendment could actually be implemented. Because if you look at the 2008 and you look at like what happened with the Coast Guard, there was a lot of changes. So trying to have a little bit more predictability in terms of feasibility. As Christy mentioned, this was one of the critical points. Was the upper blue box is a 20-meter bay, which was what was used for 2008, which matched the building widths of the old buildings. But as you can see, for like usable square feet, it was 130 square feet per seat and required a lot of exterior skin. One of the parameters was looking at a 30-meter grid, which is really more comparable to private market office buildings, really typical in DC, which we could get down to the closer target of 115 square feet per seat, reduced exterior skin, so we could make it more feasible in cost. The diagrams to the right show that because we were going to be bringing a little bit more square footage to the West Campus from the East Campus, the 2008 master plan was pretty capped on height. To add square feet on the existing footprints is the middle diagram. We would exceed the height limits of the 2008. And to actually make the floor plates more feasible by widening them on the lower diagram, you essentially start to restrict all your daylight and it becomes untenable in terms of fitting those buildings. So our first charge was let's make sure that the 2008 doesn't work for the new building standards. We started off with the consulting parties because of understanding in 2008 the appreciation for the South Lawn and the buildings, but also, as Christy had mentioned, like the lessons learned since 2008. And we had a couple site visits with the consulting parties, and a lot of people, it's been 10 years, so there were new members. A lot of the members hadn't been up there for several years. And I think it was really beneficial to, with like the State Historic Preservation Office, CFA, and all the various other consulting parties to really have a discussion about how to preserve the South Lawn and which buildings were most critical. And what came out of that was the physical plant, and these are in blue, 64, Hitchcock up on the top 37, and Admin Row really were the most defining characteristics or character buildings for preserving the South Lawn. And the buildings in red, which some had been looked at as potentially being moved in the previous master plan, they were had character, but maybe those were due to the problems with rehab, I would say more sacrificial. So those were the ones that were identified that sort of opened up the field for the buildings, the new development. So that was one of the first things we kind of achieved some consensus on with the consulting parties. As I mentioned, 1.2 million square feet, a certain footprint, trying to use a repetitive footprint that is most efficient. for the government. And, first thing is, when we started with 1.2, we had not really a sense of what the division of the 1.2 might be in terms of size of departments. So we just started doing physical tests. Should that be 3 buildings, 4 buildings, 5 buildings? And what's the impact of that on how it faces the south lawn? How might those buildings address the administration buildings? And generally, we used a lot of tests of geometry of what buildings might be saved and what may not be saved. These are some of the sketches we used, and this was looking at from the south lawn. And there was, we were charged by the consulting parties, well, what if we made fewer buildings and taller and sort of opened up the landscape? And I'll say other members of the consulting party said, well, what if we keep them lower below the tree line? And it was a really great dialogue because I think it informed, as we moved towards the consensus, was, too many buildings created a wall. Some of where there might be height, it had to be really massaged in terms of not being too much of an impact and too visually strong. So this was within the campus. This was actually from outside the campus. And as we update the master plan, the charge will be to do a one-for-one comparison so that we can look at 2008 and then look at the 2009 amendments so that everybody understands what the actual changes are. And this just shows, if you're doing 3 buildings taller versus 5 buildings, it starts to, is it more of a wall or is it more sort of intermittent? For the master plan with the 1.2 million, we also, through discussions in terms of potential programming, we wanted to basically design the show the maximum envelope of 1.2 million above ground. The master plan in 2008 had a lot of below ground and above ground. We did this so that everyone, the consulting parties, could visualize if there is no below ground development. Now, as this moves further, if there are some facilities which need to be secure and if there can be below grade or partially below grade or daylit, maybe the envelopes might be reduced a bit, but this is really the maximum envelope for the 1.2. And that was really what one of the consulting parties wanted to know, that it's not going to get higher. This is just a high-level summary of the 4 of the meetings we had with the consulting parties. And as we were working through with the consulting parties, it really started to lead to there's more doing two sites, about equal 600,000 each, and then DHS was looking at that might be a department size, minimum size for a department. I already talked about the existing buildings. The plateau view sheds were really critical. Massing in height, again, I'll talk a little bit more later with diagrams, where if there is massing and where there's height, where it should occur. How the development relates to Hitchcock. And then we had a lot of great discussions about the ravine. Currently the ravine, which is south of the Coast Guard, north of the South Lawn, it's really a barrier between connecting the campus. And the discussion started to focus on how they can actually become more of a seam than just a barrier. So these are some of the diagrams. Again, the upper left one is really looking at we call it 2 buildings, but it's really 4 wings, connected wings, which would be 2 departments. The massing allows for some porosity between the 2 buildings, so there's still a sense of landscape. The plateau view sheds were preserved. The axial relationship for the south building, it's currently, the existing building is off axis from Hitchcock, so we wanted to make, in the parameters, ensure that the new development relates to Hitchcock, but it can have a little bit of flexibility because of distance. The massing and height on the lower left is, if there are higher portions of the building, really first orient them in direction so they have less impact to the south lawn, so it's a little bit more to the west of the plateau, and also orient them and step them so that it doesn't block views from the campus. The ravine building is really how do we connect to the powerhouse, which is not going to be used as a utility structure, and it's not actually part of the workplace program at this point, but how that can actually start to create the seam for connecting the 2 campuses with the Coast Guard and the plateau. And then finally, the ravine landscape on the lower right, which says that instead of taking this, it is a barrier, make it a connection for especially DHS employees going from the Coast Guard over to the South Lawn. So here is the illustrative concept plan for the consensus showing the two buildings, and it's rotated a bit along the South Lawn. And again, the plant is preserved, 64 is preserved, admin row is maintained. And here is looking at with the two buildings and how we've broken up the massing. On the lower image is I'll say the max envelope for the height of the buildings. Just another view of the plan, which shows, now it's looking north, south, the two buildings. And then we have Olin on our team as landscape architects. And also, so this was just to illustrate some of the views on the South Lawn with the new construction. And that was one of the points, is the South Lawn isn't really as much about the buildings being held across from the admin row. It's really about the landscape framing the South Lawn. So that's one view. Here's a close-up of how we can take the ravine and actually turn it into an accessible landscape between the ice house and the new construction in 64. This shows that with existing vertical circulation in red on the left and terracing the landscape and looking at it from both slope stabilization and balancing of cut and fill with both the construction site and the ravine, that we can actually create a more usable, beneficial landscape to connect the two edges of the campus. And this is a view, and again, one of another view that came up during the consulting parties was this is a great opportunity to frame with the ice house on the left, the new construction on the right, views back to Hitchcock, so that we're using the views as wayfinding for the campus. And again, here's the view down, looking from essentially the top of the plateau to the smokestacks of the power plant and the entry court for the new construction, which is built to using the architecture to stabilize the slope, and then also as an entry that connects to both the South Lawn on the west and the U.S. Coast Guard on the right. And then this is actually just another view from the South Lawn. Now the INA site was something that it's a secure facility, and we looked at it above near the center building and the Coast Guard. You need to be proximate to the Coast Guard because it is a secure facility. It needs to have an underground connection. It's about 175,000 square feet. The view on the right is from the Secretary's office. So because of the canopy of trees, you can't actually see the site. But we worked through with consulting parties that if this is a structure that's secure, it can be below grade partially. The only thing above grade would be the small volume that would be complementary to the Coast Guard. And because it's partially buried into the slope, it could be daylit so that there would be adequate daylighting for the workplace. Just a view showing that essentially the white building is the 2 stories, which is a mirror to the Coast Guard, and then the rest would be green roof, so it'd really be looking more as a horizontal landscape if you're at the center building and the upper landscape or the upper area. This is a very complicated matrix, which I won't get into, other than to sort of summarize what Christy had said, that while this moving some of the development over to the West Campus, the bottom line is sort of the critical. It's where it was $6 million in 2008 for both campuses, it's now 5.7, so it's about a 5% reduction of development. And then in terms of seats, it's also a reduction in seats from the previous master plan. And then just to finish, this was just intended to be a high-level overview, and we will be coming back in fall of 2019. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just add, really, the purpose of today's presentation is an introduction to the St. Elizabeth's campus. I know this is a rather new commission, and there's a lot of history here, so it's going to be a big project, and we may do another information presentation even before the fall, so we'll see how it goes.
Turnstile Williams, excuse me. Thank you. would you entertain some feedback? Anybody care to comment at this time? Question? Yes.
I'm curious, and I am new to the commission, so if there's been a discussion about this before, I'm not aware of it, but I'm curious what is contemplated. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Cash.
So I know you'll be back, and I don't want to get into too much detail before you actually present us with the plan, but it's been a while since I've been out there, and back when I was on the federal side, I used to be pretty involved in this. There was always kind of on the books a possible another metro station because the Green Line runs there around the campus. And I mean, it's not necessarily the most feasible and definitely not cheap, but
there's a lot of enhancements to that particular station, and in terms of district shuttle and transportation, also working with Congress Heights. I think that is probably seen more as the opportunity to connect Congress Heights Station, the Congress Heights community with the West Campus.
But I mean, is it precluded on your side now for an actual additional station? Because I know that the congestion.
It's all
all
on
that.
district property, so it's.
So none of the Green Line goes under the West Campus?
No, it's all over it's on the edge of near Suitland Parkway, so it pretty much is right north of where the old Dorothy Dixon Hospital.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Other comments? I just have a couple. Thank you. This was my first exposure to St. Elizabeth, so appreciate it. There's a lot to learn. I would say that I know you're just getting started, so as we continue the new ones, sort of sit into the hillside, is that sort of an idea?
So I think because this was a briefing and working with the consulting parties, we've had the benefit of we actually have a model that we built, which
the economic pressures here, but this is a historic landmark, and so we'd like to understand sort of what we're hearing the words about poor condition and deterioration, and I'm certain I don't doubt it. It would just be helpful to see that, or maybe there's a possibility of a site visit or something like that. We sometimes do that. And then I just had one thing for Ms. Turnstall Williams. I'm sorry, I apologize. No, it isn't. I just have to get used to it. On the page where you have the bar graph of what was requested for funding versus actual funding. And I noted in my review of your package that really we were only funded for 4 of the 13 years that you've been requesting funding at what you were requesting. 9 were underfunded or not funded at all. I gather, and I don't know the history, but I gather that this is because, as you sort of suggested, there's some credibility about whether this can happen or not and to get enough momentum and those kinds of things. The last point on that slide where I'll just read it, says, build authorizers confidence that a critical mass of DHS personnel will be housed on site before funding for additional adaptive reuse will be considered. So I guess I feel like that could be a conflict in notion, in the sense that right now the idea is it seems like it could prove the opposite is true. In other words, if we've only funded 43% because we don't believe adaptive reuse can be implemented or realized, then how does tearing that down and building new buildings at more efficient and cost-effective ways prove the point that we're going to convince authorizers to have confidence to do further adaptive reuse?
I think the big challenge of where we are right now is that we've spent a tremendous amount of money on this campus already, both in terms of the construction, but a lot of it is in infrastructure. So a lot of the dollars that have gone out there are in, utilities, site access, perimeter security, not office space for people. And so the challenge is these, the existing historic buildings are all very small for the most part. The center building, the one that's just being completed, is the largest, and it's about 260,000 square feet. The rest of them are anywhere between 5 to 60,000 square feet. So they're relatively small. So and then they're inefficient. So the challenge that we're having is that if we invest what in some cases is close to $1,000 a square foot in those buildings, we can't get very many people in them. And so what they've said is you need to take new construction that you can build at $350 a square foot and get a critical mass out there so that it makes sense to continue investing in the campus. If we can't make that argument that, yes, we can actually achieve a consolidated campus, at least to some degree, DHS's need, and we have Chris Mills here from DHS to represent the tenant, is tremendous, and it won't all be accommodated on the site. One of the other things that we've shifted, in the previous master plan, we did talk about different buildings for different components, and now we're developing it, I mean, it's kind of a dirty word on a landmark campus, but as a spec. We're getting as much square footage as we think we can do without destroying the landmark, but not earmarking it for a specific agency because we don't know when the funding will come. All those agencies are currently housed in lease space, and it kind of depends on we get the funding and this lease is available to get out of, and they'll kind of stagger it that way. But yes, your point is well taken. It does seem a little bit of a misnomer, but the big challenge is just being able to demonstrate that we can get a lot of people out there. I think there was concern about the 2008 master plan, and as Otto laid out, the relative inefficiency of even the new buildings that were proposed that still wouldn't result in a tremendous increase in the population.
Okay, thank you. And one last little comment for the next round of conversation. The view corridors from the campus, and particularly the administrative buildings along Martin Luther King Drive Road or Avenue, excuse me, it would be good to know how those will be affected by your proposed new interventions into the view corridor down into the city.
Okay.
Okay, Commissioner Cash.
Just because some of the funding stuff was brought up, I was going to avoid it, but I just wanted to kind of put out there because I'm sure that several other commissioners couldn't necessarily go here. But I mean, I've had a lot of experience with this project. I worked on the Senate Homeland Security Committee for 4 years back when this all started around 2004, 2005, 2006. And I mean, it really is a shame that the constraint on funding caused one building to be built at a time, rerouting of a lot of infrastructure. Just the lack of funding increased the cost exponentially because it was just not good planning and not good support by Congress. So as someone that's on the outside now and looking at it, I mean, it's a real shame that this, when I first visited that campus back, oh God, it's almost been over 15 years. I mean, it's a real shame that I thought that we'd be up and running now. The fact that the secretary is just moving in there now. I mean, I was actually able to walk around some of the buildings when I was there, and some of the older buildings, what was going to be TSA and some of the other ones. And I really hope that they're still in decent shape. And I would just hopefully take this away. The district hasn't always had the greatest track record of preserving some things that are intended to be something done with. The council's been very critical of the executive in the city about demolition by neglect. We had a lot of historic facades down in Anacostia that fell down because we didn't take care of it. And I mean, and NCPC knows well what happened in Franklin School because of a lot of not keeping as good of a not keeping up with things when it should have been, knowing that we're eventually going to do something with it. And I think that then increases pressure to say, well, this building is just in such poor shape, we might as well let it fall down now because it's double the price just to renovate it, and it's not, I mean, we can't even save it anymore. So I just hope that GSA is investing the resources that it can to shore up some of these buildings that it can, to make sure that we don't have any more that kind of go from, I think it was the blue to the red, that they're going to go away. So I just kind of wanted to give that a little bit of perspective and implore you to stabilize as much as you can.
And that's a fair point. The buildings have all been modernized as things have happened, eaves start to fail. We do restabilize those, and every time we do get funding, there is a component that goes to stabilization of the existing buildings. But yes, I mean, some of them have been vacant for up to 50 years, and we're in bad shape to begin with. Some of them, just the original construction is challenging. So it is going to be an ongoing challenge. As we worked with the consulting parties, we took some of that into consideration about where, for lack of a better word, we could get the most bang for our buck, which buildings were the most important to make sure that we retained, and where do we have more flexibility so that we could accommodate the new construction that would take some of the pressure off of those historic buildings needing to be more than they could possibly be.
Mr. Chairman, I want to reflect on, I can go back a little further than he goes, since my house is about 10 blocks, maybe or more from your site, and where I was born and raised in that neighborhood. In fact, some of my friends, not me, some of my friends used to get through a hole in the fence many years ago and chase rabbits.
I've heard
on
about
Thanksgiving
rabbits.
for Thanksgiving meals. We knock them in the head, and I mean, they would, and so I know that very well. And I'm also, you got a wonderful cemetery there, which you all have taken care of. I want to also commend the Coast Guard. Historically, has been very, the same thing can happen with the present citizens, residents, and also with new people who will come into the community. So we were hoping it would go much faster than it has gone. And I think the chairman has mentioned it, but you need to take a tour, because there are a lot of people here who have not seen it. It is a phenomenal campus, and the history is just immensely interesting. So I thank you for what you're doing. I'm encouraging you to go further and stick with us in the community. We really do want to see people moving in, because when you're there, you also we connect to us even more as a community there. So the best to you.
Thank you. And we will absolutely, as Otto kind of alluded to in some of the images in your request for a site section, it's a very challenging site in terms of huge topographical changes.
Yeah.
And so understanding something, sometimes we look at something in plan and we think, oh, we solved it. And then you get out there and you're like, that, what seemed like a big deal isn't, what didn't seem like a big deal is. So yes, we'll definitely try to make arrangements working with staff to get the commission out.
There was one thing I've been mentioning that hasn't happened yet. Maybe it won't. I think there's going to be a lot of interest in terms of, I think you need a place for meetings to be held that are not secured. Coast Guard has us there often for events, but you got to go through all this security. And I think that when you're going to have press conferences, you may have a lot of things. Hopefully nothing dramatic will happen that you'll need to brief the press. But public and press, maybe if there's some space where the East Campus, where a structure, not a big deal, but a structure with video, audio, visual, space where you can present what you've done there. I mean, the Coast Guard facility is just phenomenal, but there needs to be a place you can do that without so much security to get in, outside the gates in some way, maybe.
Understood. I'm going to ask Chris Mills from DHS to come up and he can respond more specifically to that.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Appreciate your point, sir. But on the campus, Hitchcock Hall, the auditorium, we have agreed and committed to from the very beginning with the programmatic agreement to make that facility available to the community in the evenings. It's a 600-plus seat auditorium. It's being fully renovated with new IT, and it's looking terrific. The construction will be done next month. IT will take another several months to finish up. It's next to Gate 2. Gate 2 will be the visitor's gate, and yes, we do have security requirements to get on, but we are working with FPS and planning for the ability to bring people in because it's right adjacent to allow that use.
But we used to use bowling a lot in our job.
Yes, sir.
And they can't so much now because of all the security. So maybe we'll work through that.
We will. We will be able to, and we'll set up temporary perimeters. We'll make arrangements. We do a monthly tour program with DC Preservation League to get folks on the campus. So we'll commit to working with you and the community on it, and we look forward to the building being done and welcoming folks in.
Thank you all. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's
Commissioner
okay.
White.
I wasn't going to say anything, but listening to all this, I just wanted to support all the things that have been said. And when I go back and look at what was in our documents here and reminding everyone why this campus existed and thinking about how you're approaching it. And the fact that it's a National Historic Landmark, there's only 2,500 of these in the country. So I think it's a really special place. And the reason it says, is that this is an example of mid-19th century reform movement, which believed in moral treatment for the care of the mentally ill through the therapeutic blending of architecture with the natural environment. And I hope that really guides your approach to this site. And I agree, it would be nice to see more of a site perspective. I have visited the site, and it is pretty extraordinary. And I know you're under incredible pressure to get more people on there and make it efficient. But referring to like sacrificial buildings, I mean, it's just, it just like riles me up a little bit to hear things. And I know you didn't mean that in any offensive way, but the idea of demolition by neglect and to have both this and the Franklin School on our agenda in one day is just a little much to to take. So, I mean, I really do implore you to take a look at how you can be creative with the historic structures and the uniqueness of that campus.
Thank you, and as the Director of Preservation, I totally agree with you. And that is my charge. One thing that I will say, and Chris alluded to, we do have a programmatic agreement that was a result of a protracted 106 negotiation for the 2008. That includes both, we just recently did last year an exhibit with the Building Museum on the architecture of the campus as well as mental health. And then we're getting ready to publish a monograph that sort of responds to that exhibit. On the campus, as buildings are done, we will have an interpretive signage trail essentially around the campus that will provide anyone can walk up and there'll be images as well as interpretive text about the campus. So we're doing some of that. We're looking at the exhibit was built in such a manner that it could be disassembled and can be reinstalled elsewhere. So it may be that we take some space in the visitor center. We're looking at opportunities for that. We may also
Museum, the Anacostia Museum.
and they're under construction right now, I know, making some upgrades. So we have, your point is well taken, and we have a pretty strong interpretive program, but it can be more robust, particularly as the Secretary occupies and access to the campus will inevitably be a little bit more difficult. So, yes, thank you.
Last comments. Thank you very, very much for the briefing. We learned a lot. We have a lot more to learn. We look forward to working with you. At this point, I think that concludes our open session agenda. If there's no other business, the open session is now adjourned.